This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate what if Kid Naruto left the village after awakening an unknown power. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
There was something more that occurred during Gurren Lagann's rebirth to pure spiral energy as Tengen Toppa that nobody could have predicted. A distinct entity, a biological Gurren Lagann, if you will, was created in the new form of void they named the Spiral Nemesis was torn by this human-controlled machine that destroyed the universe. The anti-spirals thought the universe would be destroyed by the Spiral Nemesis, but they were wrong. Even though the anti-spirals had erected a brick wall in front of it, the spiral power that resides in the double helix that evolution moves on eventually crumbled under the force of its drill. The Spiral Nemesis was a portal to a new dimension made possible by evolution rather than an unstoppable black hole. The new world created by the Spiral Nemesis was, in fact, the birthplace of Gurren Lagann's biological essence. However, this being still needed to develop even after it was born. Irony could only be described as the same creatures whose will to live torn apart their own fabric. Mankind also lived on this new plane, but because of the new physics brought about by the new world, even though both races were identical, they were different in one way. There was no such thing as spiral power. In other words, they had a different energy to make up for the spiral energy. However, they still had the ability to affect evolution even without the spiral power's expanding influence on life, which made it a quick and complex process. They were simply slower than their neighbor. It took them at least 1,000 years to catch up to each other in terms of evolution speed. Headstrong took on a new meaning when the humanoid machines known as gunmen were used as the ultimate weapon in their military arsenal, a bomb to the massive destructive power. However, because they were less developed, they used their destructive power to match their neighbor. The DNA was home to this power, which was similar to spiral power in that it combined the spiritual and physical energies in their bodies to create something akin to spiral power. In 9 months, this entity would reach its zenith and at last make its appearance on the new world. If Lady Luck had been there that day, at least that is what would have occurred. But regrettably, the child did not have a happy birthday. It was undoubtedly not a pleasant place to go on vacation in a world where ninja nations existed, feudal lords were engaged in land-based conflicts, and demons roamed the planet, particularly today, which turned out to be his birth date. This entity could have registered what was happening around him if his brain had been a day or more developed. For the brief moments he was able to open his eyes, he saw what he believed to be flames. A man with shoulder-length blonde hair and ocean-blue eyes was holding him, his face dejected. The land was ravaged and thrashed by a hideous-looking beast. Fear and confusion took over the child's mind, causing his eyes to close and his cries to become louder. Following that, he sensed a problem with his body when an unidentified sound reached his ears. The final words he heard before all other distractions vanished as the stress of sobbing wore him to sleep were, "I love you, son, grow strong, and never let anyone tell you that you are worthless." This child of destiny was born on a land called Earth that was not all that different from its neighbor. However, the planet's 30% landmass was clearly different from that of its neighbor. The land where he was born was known to the locals as the Five Elemental Nations. Hai no Kuni, in the shinobi village of Konohagakure no Sato, more precisely. However, today marked the beginning of the most epic and tragic battle they had ever documented. However, their opinions would differ if they were fully aware of the reality of what had happened to them. For example, it would not have been necessary to sacrifice the village leader, known as the Yondaime Hokage, in order to defeat a creature they called the Kyuubi, and the lives lost could have been prevented. However, for good reason, the Yondaime was unable to kill the enormous fox, so this was not the case. Instead, he encases the Kyuubi's soul within a newborn. As time went on, the child's greatest blessing would be this curse that was placed upon him now. Since the shinobi population, who were aware of what actually happened that night, demanded the child's blood, the former Konoha leader located the child and placed him under protection since the child was a real hero. But the shinobi did not recognize that. The Sandaime Hokage or Hiruzen Sarutobi would not grant their request. The civilian population quickly learned about the child and the new responsibility he was carrying. 3/4 of the village's population demanded the Yondaime's blood, as did civilians and shinobi who did not share his final wishes for the child to be viewed as a hero. The child, they thought, was the demon that raged through the village in human form. They believed that since they perceived the child as a demon, the demon ought to perish. Hiruzen quickly put an end to the people's desire to kill the child by enacting a law that stated that anyone who even mentioned what he had said would face punishment. If this occurred in conjunction with assault and they were found guilty, the punishment was death because, unbeknownst to them, this world was now the home of a great entity, and this creature that came into the world that night was called Naruto Uzumaki. However, Naruto is now 8 years old, which is not what you would anticipate from a typical child. Hiruzen gave him an apartment and money to live on after he was expelled from the orphanage when he was 3 years old. The Konoha Council, which was made up of both civilians and shinobi, primarily prevented most attempts to assist the boy. Because of this, the boy was continuously cornered and beaten to within an inch of his life by both shinobi and civilians, being more vicious than the last time because of the attacks. He was in the hospital's trauma unit all the time. BTU had an amazing rate of healing because of his condition. However, today was the worst of all because it was Naruto's birthday, and the Kyuubi no Yuko attacked the village on that very day. He was now cornered in an ally with the intention of killing him by a crowd of people bigger than any that had previously attacked him. Naruto never understood why he was so despised, but he also didn't want to be attacked. The closer the mob got to him, the more terrified he became. He finally asked the question because he wanted to know what he had done to merit these unfair beatings, which wasn't the best idea either. With tears streaming down his cheeks, he questioned, "What have I ever done to you that you hate me so much?" When the crowd started to close in, a villager yelled, "That is very simple, demon. You attacked our village, killed people in our families, and took the life of our village hero, the Yondaime. Now we'll take your life as retribution." As they started their vicious beating of Naruto, a spine-tingling scream reverberated through the night. They used everything they had, including clubs and wooden staves, to beat him. They also kept stabbing him with knives and kunai, causing his blood, the blood of an innocent person, to splatter the floor and walls of the ally. A doctor standing there would declare that Naruto's death was inevitable due to the inability to treat the gashes and contusions that now covered his body. However, when did destiny ever pay attention to the doctor? The volume of blood that had drained from Naruto's body caused him to lose consciousness. Even though he knew he was going to die, his spirit persisted in trying to live. He would not simply lie down and die here, he would not let it end here. Then he noticed a small altar standing in front of him and found himself ankle deep in water in a cavern that resembled a sewer. A tiny, round hole that resembled a key was embedded in the altar like it was waiting for something. The hole started to pulse with a green light and a loud noise. "Do you wish to live?" Naruto was terrified when a voice reverberated throughout the room. However, he did not want to pass away, but then he reasoned that there was no point in staying alive because the village would simply attack him and try to kill him. "Do you wish to live?" The voice repeated the question, but Naruto answered, this time accepting death. Naruto questioned, "What is the point of living when everyone wants you dead?" "So you're just going to lay down and die?" the voice said, sounding irritated. "What do you think you will prove by dying? Prove those fools wrong by living." The voice made Naruto wince because, while he didn't want to die, he also didn't want to experience the agony once more. His life was tainted by fear and loneliness. His good heart prevented him from feeling the hatred he desired. The voice asked Naruto, "How do I know whether to live or die? The people believe I'm evil, so what if I am?" Listen to what your heart tells you. It never lies and never tells you what you feel is wrong. If you listen, it will tell you. In an attempt to control what his heart was telling him, Naruto balled his fist at his chest, and it was loud enough for everyone on the planet to hear. His advice was to never give up and to never give in so that he could show the world what he was capable of. Naruto felt something materialize in his hand at that moment. Unlocking his fist, he discovered a tiny golden drill fastened to a base that resembled a key and had a green light that pulsed from the middle, just like the altar. He saw that the drill would be a perfect fit. After comparing it to the altar, a huge surge of energy rushed through his body as he turned and slowly inserted the drill into the slot. When they sensed the energy emanating from the child, the people in the real world froze in horror. He started to recover from the harm they had caused him. He made sickening noises as his broken bones snapped back into place. He then started to rise, frightening the unfortunate idiots who had harmed this force of fate. Fearful of what they saw, Naruto's eyes stared at them. His once azure eyes had turned into green vortices that were constantly spinning. However, it wasn't over yet, as a second surge of energy came from his right shoulder and started to solidify. The consolidated energy then manifested as a drill spinning onto his chest, creating a hole that resembled a metallic key. As he held it tightly, the tiny drill-like key that initiated this incident melted out of his hand. The crowd had fled from the boy by this point, fearing that he had unleashed the Kyuubi on them, but since he had asserted his birthright, they failed to see that something extraordinary had occurred. Several of his spiky, unmanageable hairs had fallen out, causing them to lose some of their volume, but in exchange, his hair became more shiny. The final event was the appearance of tattoos on his upper arm from his shoulder that depicted the top half of what appeared to be a skull with the top of its head turning to flame while sporting long, triangular, white sunglasses. He felt weak and confused as the immense power that burst from his body subsided. However, Hiruzen emerged with two Anbu behind him as he approached the brink of consciousness. Now that he would be protected, Naruto was ecstatic. When Hiruzen spotted Naruto, he was so alarmed that he hurried to the boy who would rival the Yondaime's godlike speed. He stepped back 2 paces and knelt down to speak with the boy. He asked, "Naruto, are you hurt? What happened here?" But Naruto collapsed forward, unconscious, unable to respond. As they hurried to the hospital, Hiruzen gestured for the Anbu to assist Naruto in case he was injured. The doctors who typically assist Naruto hurried him into a diagnostics room as soon as they arrived to determine the extent of the boy's injuries. After what seemed like days of sitting in a waiting room, a doctor finally came up to Hiruzen. Hiruzen was overjoyed when the doctor said, "Lord Hokage, Naruto is completely fine, but his body's physiology has changed to something different. It's unexplainable, but in layman's terms he will make a full recovery." Hiruzen approached Naruto and observed the changes in his body while he slept, primarily the metal key-like hole in his chest and the new tattoos. However, as he opened the boy's hand to reveal the tiny drill-like key, he noticed that Naruto was holding something. Although he was unsure of its exact function, he was certain that it was connected to Naruto's physical changes. Naruto found himself in the sewer-like cavern once more after losing consciousness. However, the altar had vanished, and in its place was a huge cage with a piece of paper bearing a seal written in kanji. From the cage, Naruto could hear labored breathing as he approached through the water. He noticed two enormous red eyes staring at him with sadness and sorrow. "So we finally meet," a young man's voice said, echoing with the cage. Fear gripped Naruto, who he asked, "Who are you?" As the figure entered the light and revealed a giant fox with 9 tails, the voice said, "I am the reason you were hated and beaten. I am both your prisoner and burden, and for this I am sorry, as the people in this world call me Kyuubi." Despite his lack of intelligence, Naruto was aware of what was happening and at last comprehended why he was despised. His mind was filled with anger, but he wanted to know why Kyuubi attacked, not get even. However, he also learned that demons kill without regret and don't care what happens to people. "You are the reason I'm hated and beaten, but I know demons say sorry. Tell me why you attacked the village and I can forgive you." The fox replied to this. "Very well, but I have to start from the beginning. My name is not Kyuubi and I am most certainly not a demon. My name is Kamina, and at one time I was human." Kamina, as he said, was his name. Bewildered, Naruto questioned, "You are a human, but how did you become a fox?" Kamina recounted the story of Logan and how he acquired Gurren and established the Gurren Brigade, saying, "That is the strange part, as I am not even from this world. 15 years ago I am my self-adopted brother Simon lived underground, but my dream was to go to the surface, and that dream came true, but we were way over our heads." Even though Naruto was in awe of the story being told to him, he could almost see it unfold in his head. He would have realized he was seeing his own memories if he had any better knowledge. He could actually clearly see the appearance of Kamina, Simon, and the gunman known as Gurren Lagann, so his overactive imagination had very little room to work. Kamina shared with Naruto how far she had come from living in a hole in the ground. "When we attacked the Daigunzen, I was mortally wounded and dying from blood loss, but I refused to lay down and die, but in a way I died that day. I became a being of pure spiral power, not able to touch anyone but influence courage in their hearts." Naruto questioned the flame-colored fox, "But if you were made of energy, how did you become a fox?" "That's simple. When I helped Simon and the others escape the alternate reality imprisoned by the anti-spirals, they gained cosmic influence and I was sent to this world and materialized as the fox you see before you," the once great spiral being replied. The blonde with the blue eyes questioned, "But then why did you attack the village?" As the memory of the lives he had taken flashed before his eyes, Kamina recalled, 9 months after I arrived here I was attacked by 3 men. One of them had a mask on, another had a face full of piercings, and the last one had eyes that reminded me of snakes. The one in the mask had one visible red eye that put me in a trance and made me do whatever he wanted me to." Naruto had never seen anyone like Kamina, so he gazed at the fox with fresh admiration. Since Kamina wasn't really at fault, the life of pain he had endured because of the 9-tailed fox demon appeared to end. Naruto grinned as tears streamed from his azure eyes and said, "Hey, if it wasn't your fault, all you can do is try to make up for it. If I can forgive you, then other people can as well." Since he had made this child's life so miserable, Kamina also wanted to cry. Despite the fact that he had been beaten, Naruto had forgiven him because the villagers thought he was him. But for the first time in a long time, he felt joy again after being pardoned for everything terrible that had frightened his heart. However, he later understood that he had to tell Naruto the truth about what had saved his life, so this was no time for sentimentality. "Naruto, I thank you more than you can ever believe, but now we have to be serious. What do you think happened when you turned that core drill?" Naruto replied Kamina. Fearing that something terrible had happened to him, Naruto said, "Well, I think it saved me from dying, but now I feel different from what I used to. What happened to me?" Kamina told Naruto, "You feel different because you awakened your true self. When Simon gained cosmic influence with Gurren Lagann, the essence of Gurren Lagann came alive, turning into a living being. That being is you." This statement left Naruto perplexed, but he still understood. Naruto remarked, feeling as though his dreams were being dashed, "So what do I do now? If I am Gurren Lagann, where do we go from here? I still want to become Hokage, but now I just don't know." For now we leave the village so you can train without risk of being beaten, but your dream will always stay the same. You just need to think of your power as a Kekkei Genkai," Kamina said as Naruto started to fade away. As Naruto began to gradually awaken in the real world, he noticed Hiruzen staring at him from his right. Naruto grinned at the image of his grandfather, who was always there for him. Sincerely, the old Kage inquired, "Naruto, are you awake and how are you feeling?" Hiruzen was perplexed when Naruto said, "I'm fine, but I don't think I can live in the village for a while." Hiruzen worriedly questioned, "Naruto, what exactly happened to you?" With resolve in his eyes, Naruto declared, "I'm going to leave the village to train so that never happens again because I was attacked and I could have died." Hiruzen took out a small wallet-like book because he knew that Naruto could not be argued with once he had something in his possession. He gave the book to the boy after writing Naruto's name on the inside. "If you are leaving you'll need this. It's a passport that will allow you into all ally villages, but just how long do you think you'll be gone, Naruto?" Hiruzen asked the youngster. Naruto told the elderly Kage, "I'll be leaving as soon as I can be dismissed from the hospital, and maybe 3 years tops until graduation exams." Then they left the hospital room, and Hiruzen said, "Well, you can actually leave now. I'll send for your things and see you off, but just remember this, you will have a lot of explaining to do when you return." When the two reached Konoha's front gates, two Anbu were holding Naruto's backpack, which was full of his clothes. Before heading out of the village gates to start his adventure, Naruto gave Hiruzen a hug. Hiruzen Sarutobi was having a bad day because Naruto Uzumaki had sent him a letter. In addition to leaving before they could learn more about his new physical condition, the boy had been gone for 3 years. Jiraiya, Hiruzen's final devoted pupil, was tasked with monitoring the boy's whereabouts, but it appeared as though he might just disappear entirely. Furthermore, an odd new member of the ninja community appeared out of nowhere and was said to be capable of performing seemingly impossible tasks. Red and Two Faces were the only vague descriptions that were available, and that was all that was known about it. In front of him at the moment was a man in a traditional Chunin uniform, with light brown hair and a noticeable scar across his face. One of the few people who genuinely cared about Naruto's welfare was Iruka Amino, a former hunter ninja who is currently a Chunin instructor at the Ninja Academy. Iruka was present at Hiruzen's desk to verify the veracity of any information that had surfaced regarding Naruto. The elderly Kage took a puff from his pipe and said, "Iruka, it is good to see you as always. To what do I owe this visit?" The frightened Chunin exclaimed, "I heard that mail from Naruto had arrived. Is he finally coming home?" Hiruzen's eyes met Iruka's, and he sighed, not knowing the answer to the question himself. His expression was blank, but Iruka knew it was either bad news or a response he had heard a lot of times before. He waited for the Hokage's words with a morbid eagerness, despite his fear of what they would say. The elderly Kage took a puff from his pipe and said sadly, "I am truly sorry, Iruka, but he has not verified that he is returning. All his letter said is he has a few things he needs to do before he returns." The brunette Chunin apologized, saying, "Thank you, Lord Hokage. That's all I wanted to know. I must return to the students now. Sorry to occupy your time." Hiruzen laughed as he said, "There is no need to apologize. Your visits bring me a little entertainment to this barren wasteland they call paperwork." He detested paperwork and still pondered how the other late Hokages managed to get through it without suffering any hardships. Iruka went back to the academy to take over for his replacement. He was sitting at his desk thinking, not realizing that he was thinking aloud, when the class began a test on theories of chakra control. He said aloud, but not loud enough for all of his students to hear, "Naruto, where could you be? I wish you would come back already. The village just isn't the same without you." The student who primarily heard him was someone else who genuinely cared about the boy. However, it was somewhat ironic that the individual in question felt this way about Naruto because of the clan to which they belonged. The primary point was that, despite being the oldest clan in Konohagakure no Seto, they presented themselves as genuine royalty, even if this was self-proclaimed. This individual was an 11-year-old girl with midnight blue hair who was dressed in a maroon parka-like jacket and a lager. Her eyes, however, were her most distinctive feature. More precisely, her eyes were a stunning deep lavender, but it appeared as though she was blind because neither her pupil nor her iris were present in the lavender orbs. That was not the case, though, as Hinata Hyuga, the next in line to become the head of the Hyuga clan, had a unique genetic trait, or Kekkei Genkai, known as the Byakugan, a dojutsu type that is uncommon compared to others. It is unique due to its capacity to perceive the body's chakra flow and its 360-degree angle, which enables them to employ Juken, a unique type of taijutsu. However, the majority of Hyuga are heartless and ruthless, having been taught to be so in order to safeguard the Byakugan's secrets, which led to the division of the clan into 2 branches, including the main house. However, the branch houses that are marked with a unique seal that damages the brain, which ultimately destroys the Byakugan, are compelled to work for the main branch because the main branch abuses the seal for its own benefit and keeps the more potent Juken techniques for itself because it thinks it is superior. That's what she thought, anyway. However, because of her overly protective personality and a series of traumatic events that occurred when she was 4 years old, including the death of her mother while giving birth to Hinata's younger sister Hanabi, Hinata was not a typical Hyuga. Instead, she was shy, timid, and lacked confidence. Her gorgeous lavender eyes, which glistened like the stars and were filled with so much emotion, and her lovely midnight blue hair were two more characteristics that set her apart from the other member. The Hyuga's all-black hair and Byakugan eyes, which were white and emotionless except for the cold, heartless nature to which the clan was accustomed, are the reasons these characteristics are so extreme. However, her troubles didn't stop there. When she turned 8, her own father, who had become colder and crueler than other Hyugas, disowned her, believing that she was. He disowned her to allow her younger sister, who currently has more promotions than Hinata, to succeed her as the heir apparent to the clan's throne. Her confidence issue only got worse when her father brought her back into the clan at the age of 10, despite the fact that she had grown exponentially in her training. Kurenai Yuhi, Hinata's mentor, took her in and prevented her from being granted the branch house seal. However, she notices Naruto. At that moment she witnessed abuse by adults, including a few mob beatings, an event that most other children did not witness. The Hokage's law did not apply to Naruto because he was alone and the other kids his age mistreated and avoided him based only on their parents' word. She may not have understood why Naruto was despised, but she was aware of his strength. No matter how hurt he was, he would get back up and continue on, and if he faced a challenge, he would overcome it. Her admiration for his strength quickly developed into a crush, which in turn developed into love. She personally confirmed what she had heard, that Naruto had left. After inadvertently overhearing Haruka and the Hokage discussing him, the village was ecstatic, with a rumor that he had passed away. After that, Hinata would frequently listen in on Haruka whenever she had the chance, but she hoped he would come back and have the courage to tell him how she felt. A tall figure, at least 6 feet 5, was seen in an unidentified location on a desolate, snow-covered battlefield in an area that resembled a high mountain. A voice that seemed to appear out of nowhere said, "You know, it's been 3 years and you have had more than enough training, don't you? We should head back?" The question made the figure laugh. The figure walked over to a very steep cliff and said, "Yeah bro, I think you're right, we'll head out now and we could probably arrive by morning." The enigmatic voice said, "Hey little bro, you thinkin' what I'm thinkin'?" A fervent, "You friggin' know it," was the figurative response. The voices echoed, "Watch out Konoha, cause here we come, just who the hell do you think we are?" As the figure jumped off the cliff and exploded forward in midair, vanishing from view. In Konoha, it was just about noon when one of the 2 Chunin on duty at the main gate yelled in exasperation into the sky. However, because this particular pair was skilled in espionage and infiltration, these Chunin were not typically placed on guard duty. The fact that there hadn't been any traffic between the village and the outside world for weeks made their job today even worse than getting approached by a gay man while intoxicated. The ninja community referred to the Chunin, whose names were Katetsu and Azumo, as the dynamic duo, because they were rarely seen apart. In addition, they were 2 of the least motivated ninjas when work wasn't involved. They could rival the Nara clan, who were regarded as Konoha's most slothful ninjas. Additionally, they were able to store alcohol, which turned Tsunade into one of Konoha's Sanin, a terrible drunk and compulsive gambler. Katetsu, who was easily recognized by the bandages covering his face just above his nose and ending just short of his eyes, was the one who screamed in exasperation from sheer boredom. He also appeared to have stuck his finger in an electrical socket or never even touched a brush in his life. Additionally, Azumo always wore his hair hanging in his face and wore his headband in the shape of a bandana. Additionally, they were another pair of Naruto fans who were on guard duty that devoted night as genin and a few others. The hospital was in complete disarray, with both ninjas and onlookers occupying the hallways. They were among the few who saw the Yondaime Hokage explain how the seal would imprison and contain the Kyuubi while drawing the formula for the seal on Naruto's stomach. Instead of harboring animosity or malice toward Naruto, they showed empathy and compassion for his struggles. Azumo's eyes were glazed over with sheer boredom as he glanced over at his partners. After the 2 seconds of entertainment, the dreary promos of a dull day loomed overhead like they were sinking to the bottom of an ennui-filled lake. Azumo said in a slack voice, "You know, screaming is the first thing that will get me to hit you with this chair." Katetsu complained, "Sorry, but I can't take this any longer. Why do we get the lamest job in the village? Come on, nothing ever happens during gate duty." Azumo made Katetsu relive the agonizing memory by saying, "Hey, you shouldn't have set off that explosive tag in the public hot springs. You blew up the entire fence to the women's side." In response, Katetsu said, "Yeah, Well, that doesn't change the fact that this is the worst job they could have given us. Hell, D-rank missions are better than this. His voice was obviously depressed. However, he was unaware of how mistaken he was until a figure emerged at the road's edge where vocal visibility was cut off. Upon witnessing this, Kotetsu appeared to become more animated, with hints of excitement growing as the figure appeared to approach. However, he was completely unaware that the individual in question would restore a long-lost sense of excitement to the entire village. The figure became increasingly recognizable as it gradually approached the gate. The individual in question was a male who was at least 10 years old and no older than a child. As he marched on, a sling-like backpack slung over his left shoulder and his bright orange trench coat thrashed in the wind behind him. As they ascended the trench coat, flames could be seen, pausing just short of his back because the coat lacked sleeves. The boy's arms were exposed, displaying the tattoos on his upper arm. The triangular sunglasses that hung over his eyes and stuck out from both sides of his face, however, were the most obvious feature. His annoying yellow hair, which shone like sunlight, was another factor. Both Kotetsu and Izumo thought the same thing when he was actually visible. Is that Naruto? Since the child in question was 6 feet from the gate, they were unaware that they were entirely correct. Izumo said to the child, "Hello, what business do you have in Konoha today?" The boy handed Izumo a notebook that looked like a wallet and said, "Oh, nothing, just returning from a long trip." As Kotetsu watched Izumo unfold the passport, he too became intrigued. Naruto Uzumaki was written in the name slot, but underneath an older photo of the boy was the Hokage's crest. Both men looked at the young boy in disbelief when they realized it was Naruto. However, the boy's appearance drastically changed, as evidenced by the bright orange glasses that covered his eyes when the sun reflected off of them. Furthermore, having a child with tattoos at his age was practically unheard of. The two older Chunin looked at Naruto, making him feel a little uncomfortable. He expected them to be friends or enemies, but he felt no animosity toward them, so he ignored it. However, their looks seemed hollow, so he turned to check if there was anyone behind him before turning back to face the Chunin. Izumo and Kotetsu laughed when Naruto asked, "What do I have on my face besides my glasses?" Kotetsu returned Naruto's passport and said, "No, we're sorry to keep you waiting. Everything is in order, go right on ahead." With joy, Naruto accepted his passport and entered the gates he had left 3 years prior. If there was any question, his first destination was the Hokage's office, but all he could think about was gnawing on a large bowl of ramen. However, it's unlikely that any living creature could match Naruto's passion for ramen. Naruto couldn't help but smile as he walked idly through Konoha's streets in the direction of the Hokage's tower. He was surrounded by people who were staring at him with a variety of expressions on their faces. Few were of excessive hatred of his very being, some were of déjà vu, and a few were of the way he was dressed. He had better things to do, and nothing the civilian population could do to him would bother him in the slightest, so he didn't let this bother him. The idea of a mob vying for his head made him laugh. In his head he could have so much fun playing with their heads until Kamina voiced his opinion. The best retaliation is to simply live and let them bastard in your glory, but don't you think that's a bit excessive? Yes, they're brain-dead idiots. In response to Kamina's comment, Naruto said, "Hey, don't worry about it, bro. I would never actually mount a defense. As for messing with their psyches, that was just a fun thought." Not much more time passed before Naruto arrived at the Hokage's tower's entrance. Naruto hurried to Hiruzen's office, where he found a young woman sitting at a desk 2 yards from the Hokage's office, where a bird-masked Anbu was on guard. There was nothing particularly noteworthy about her despite the fact that his glasses lacked bracers to keep them in place. Naruto walked over to her and adjusted them. The woman said sweetly, "Hello sir, may I help you today?" As the woman's expression changed from one of contentment to one of outright rage and disgust at his identity, Naruto remarked, "Yes, I wish to visit the Hokage. I just returned from my travels. Tell him Naruto Uzumaki is here to see him." The woman's voice was filled with venom as she said, "That is not going to happen. The Hokage would not waste his time with the likes of you. Now leave the building or be removed from the premises by force." Naruto could only smile because this was the response he had been expecting. In silence from the woman, he took an envelope out of his coat and gave it to the woman, instructing her to read it. After she opened it and started reading it, her face showed horror as if her life and her family had been in danger of dying, and a few seconds later her blood turned cold and her skin turned pale. Her voice was filled with fear instead of hostility as she told Naruto, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, just go right along ahead." Uncontrollably, Naruto approached Hiruzen's office door and flung it open as he started to deliver a speech that a typical man would find strange. A broad smile was forced onto his face. Naruto gave a humorous speech that was worth hearing. Coming home after a 3-year absence with a new outlook on life, he's manly, tenacious, and just damn good looking. Naruto Uzumaki is back, baby, Naruto said. Hiruzen glanced in the direction of the racket and saw the person who dropped his pipe to the ground with his mouth open with a speed that would have made the Yondaime blush. He bounded from his desk to Naruto in less than 3 seconds. He put his arms around Naruto and pulled him into what appeared to be a bear hug, causing Naruto's face to turn blue. "Oh, old ma." Man choking not breathing, Naruto exclaimed, causing Hiruzen to release the boy, as his face was filled with embarrassment. Hiruzen grabbed the handle to his office door and said, "I'm so sorry Naruto, let us go inside and catch up, it's been 3 years since we've really spoken to one another." As Naruto entered the office and let Hiruzen shut the door, he said, "Right you are, old man, we do have a lot to discuss." Naruto took the seat in front of Hiruzen, who moved to his desk and took his place. Then he retrieved a box of matches from his desk drawer and lit his pipe again. With one he looked at Naruto as he really was, a boy who had come back and wished he could have witnessed his development into the man he was today. Naruto was so proud of the boy that it was easy to see the strength he had acquired just by looking at him. Hiruzen said, "So where do we start, before or after you left?" Without altering the smirk on his face, Naruto said, "That is a tough question to answer, why don't you choose?" Naruto's smile widened even more at the requested conversation. "Well, how about the events that led you to leave in the first place?" Naruto purposefully misled the elderly Kage by saying, "That I can't really explain very well, you would have to ask bro on that one." Feeling that this was going to turn into a strange conversation, the elderly Kage asked, "Naruto, what do you mean by ask bro?" Naruto took off the golden drill that looked like a key from around his neck and said, "I'll show you, but don't freak out, okay?" It was better than trying to explain it. Naruto shifted his coat to the right, exposing a hole in his shirt with a circular key-like hole waiting to be used. Without wasting any time, Naruto inserted the core drill into the drive in his chest and turned it with real force. A green light started to emerge from his body as a result. In his lengthy life, Hiruzen Sarutobi had witnessed many things, such as war and widespread genocide, but the events that were unfolding in front of him dwarfed everything else he had witnessed. As his body's shape started to change and enlarge, he saw the light emanating from Naruto transform into a green cocoon that resembled a crystal. It grew to a height of 6 feet 5, tall enough to dwarf many adults. Then, in a flash of dazzling light, Naruto was transformed into a totally different person. This creature appeared to be made of crimson metal rather than flesh, indicating that it was not even close to being human. Furthermore, or perhaps more accurately, the absence of what was on top, it had no head and a maroon canopy-shaped dome with 2 crater-like holes encircled by a black band. It certainly had a face. Even though it lacked a head, the entity's entire front structure was made up of a giant face with bright yellow eyes that were both evil and virtuous, as revealed by the enormous triangular sunglasses on its face before slanted fang-like teeth ended the set, leaving a large opening around the jaw that resembled a skull. The teeth looked human. The face had no chin because it ended at a waist that resembled a fold and was held together by another black band that had 2 crater-like holes in the front and back. The massive creature's oddly protruding arms and legs fit on it just as they would on a human. However, they were incredibly large for their form, which was nearly human-like. The upper halves of the arms were encased in a casing that resembled armor. The entire upper arm was covered in a shield-like covering that proudly displayed the same symbols as Naruto's coat and tattoos. 2 barrel-like cylinders protruded from the sleek covering of the forearm, which ended just at the wrist. Additionally, there were 2 crater-like holes located immediately before the elbow. A casing that connected to a crimson shell covering and branched out over the knee in a black band-like covering covered the lower half of the legs. Another pair of craters sat on either side of the black band, which had a thin gold stripe running from one to the other. The black band stopped just before the point where the toes of a human foot would start to fill the shoes. The crimson shell covered the remainder of the foot, and that was that. The final anomaly was a protuberance from its back that resembled a box and had 4 holes in each corner. Hiruzen was at a loss for words, but he also gazed at the enigmatic creature with morbid intent. In his long life, which he had nearly lived, he had never witnessed anything so strange. The crimson being asked the perplexed Kage, "Hey Gramps, are you just going to sit there with your mouth open all day, or are we going to get down to business?" "Terribly sorry, but what happened to Naruto? I can tell by your voice you're not him." "Of course I'm not him, so open your ears and listen well." Embracing death, he finds himself a new being arriving upon a new land. He wonders, helping those in need. Attacked, he defends himself but is bound to a child by fate's tragic yet marvelous design. Trying to repent for his sin, he helps the child, and together we drill through any wall or ceiling in our path. I am the one, the only Kamina. Hiruzen was not sure whether to take the man seriously or to laugh at his antics. He gave a little chuckle in amusement, and it appeared that his response was appropriate. "So Kamina, is it from your speech you are not human, are you?" "You are both right and wrong at the same time." "How so?" I was human once upon a time. This form I am in was my mecha Gurren from my world. My body died, but I did not. After that battle I became what my world knows as spiral power. Yes, but how did you become this mecha? I also wish to know what happened to Naruto's body. Yes, you shall get your answer, but my story explains everything you need to know, because after that I found myself watching my brother Simon carry on my legacy with our combined mecha Gurren Lagann, and in his final battle I save him from being intaped in an alternate dimension using large amounts of spiral power. He and Gurren Lagann transcended to a cosmic level. One was transported here where I became a fox, and I'm sure you know what happens from there on out. As rage and terror swept through him, Hiruzen questioned, "You are the Kyuubi, what have you done to Naruto?" Hiruzen's rage nearly immediately subsided when Kamina said, "Wow, ease up on the hostility. I did nothing to the boy. Everything that happened to his body was supposed to happen. He is the living essence of Gurren Lagann in bio form. I am both forcefully and gratefully along for the ride. If what you said is true, then why did you attack that night 10 years ago?" "That is where the misconception stands. I wasn't the one who attacked, but I did defend myself. I just followed a force that told me to come this way." As his eyes touched the wood of his desk, Hiruzen said, "So the whole incident was big misunderstanding." His heart was heavy with regret and sadness. Even though Kamina's words seemed to be true, Hiruzen was still troubled by something. "Hey old man, don't beat yourself up about the past, think about the present and how it affects the world right now." To Kamina's complete surprise, Hiruzen said, "Thank you for that insight, Kamina, but I have one last question. Who has true control of Naruto's body?" As Gurren gradually started to revert back to Naruto, Kamina remarked, "That is something I can't answer. It's complicated to say, as we share control and we can also separate into two separate beings when in Gurren Lagann, but we also have found a way to part into two different bodies as well." As he bit his thumb and let a few drops of blood fall to the ground, Naruto exclaimed, "Hey old man, hold on to your hat, this is where things get weird." As he made an unexpected series of hand gestures that caused the blood on the ground to swell and change shape, Naruto took a storage scroll out of his coat. After twisting the core drill in his chest, Naruto released a powerful burst of green energy that combined with the newly formed shape. Then, with a puff of smoke, a pair of cloths, a standard samurai-grade katana, and a pair of mandarin orange triangular sunglasses appeared on the ground as Naruto used the last of the blood on his thumb to swipe it across a seal on the scroll. Before long, the trembling form began to solidify into a human being. However, it wasn't a clone or anything else that Hiruzen had anticipated. Rather, it assumed the appearance of a man with light blue hair who was around 18. His upper body was covered in tattoos, and he lacked a shirt. From the new figure, Kamina's voice said, "See, old man, I told you that I wasn't always a fox, but when you're as manly as I am, women seem to think otherwise." Hiruzen asked in confusion, "So Naruto, Kamina, tell me what just happened." "Well, that was a variation of the Chishio Bunshin, but I modified it so that Kamina gets the body for his own," Naruto boasted. Kamina wrapped his cape-like cloche around his shoulders and said, "Yeah, and it lasts as long as I want, but when we are in trouble I can dispel this body and we can combine to make Gurren Lagann." Gazing into Kamina's eyes, Hiruzen said, "So you can walk around freely, do what you want. Tell me, do you hold any hostility against the villagers?" Kamina ruffled Naruto's hair and said, "I hold no ill will towards those idiots, but I will defend myself if they present a threat to me or my little brother." Hiruzen could tell Kamina was a man of his word based on his actions. The question totally baffled Kamina, who had never even considered that before. "That is an acceptable answer, Kamina, but I will have to register you as a citizen. Tell me, what is your last name?" Kamina nervously said, "Your guess is as good as mine. As far as I know I don't have one." Hiruzen was also taken aback, but Naruto didn't seem to mind as he offered his opinion. To Kamina's and Hiruzen's surprise, Naruto's suggestion, "How about Uzumaki? It's my last name, and Kamina is my brother, so it's a perfect fit." "Very well then, Kamina, Uzumaki it is. Now on to other matters, like whether or not you wish to become a shinobi?" Hiruzen inquired to Kamina. Kamina looked at Naruto, who had his trademark smile on his face, and said, "I would like to, but I need to stay close to Naruto. It's not that we need to stay close to each other, but if Naruto is village bound I don't want to leave without him." "That is more than fine. We have positions that will meet your needs, but first we will have to evaluate your current skill status to determine what rank you would be ranked. I think tomorrow morning will be a sufficient time for you, wouldn't it?" Hiruzen stated that he was awaiting a response from. "Sounds like a plan to me." Hiruzen glanced at Naruto, who was nodding off, and remarked, "Good, now for it's your turn, Naruto." His name elicited nothing but amusing responses. Naruto screamed, "It wasn't me." As he came back to reality, Hiruzen laughed at this, since there was never a dull moment with Naruto. "It's okay Naruto, you are in no trouble, we just need to establish what we are going to do from here on out for you." Naruto stated nonchalantly, "Well, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to return to the academy so I can graduate." The elderly Kage handed Naruto an envelope and said, "Good, that's what I was hoping you would want. You can return tomorrow. Just give this note to Iruka." "Can do. Now I have some bad news for you, Naruto. The first week after you had left, a group of villagers burned down your apartment building as part of a festival in belief you were dead. I do apologies for this, as we will have to find you and Kamina a replacement." Hiruzen offered an apology. "Don't worry about it. I was planning on moving out of there anyway. I do not wish to live in a place that is out in the open. They just saved me the trouble of rummaging through that old piece of crap apartment. Now I just need to find the most secluded section of the village," Naruto said with a mature voice. Hiruzen stated that by accident, it was a dangerous area to begin with, and for a child, it was a death wish. "Well, the only area the civilian and quite a lot of our shinobi will dare go near is Training Ground 44, or as it has been named, the Forest of Death." "Perfect. Where can I find it?" In an attempt to reason with Naruto, Hiruzen said, "Naruto, hold on. Area 44 is a dangerous place. The dense forest is home to many a creature that are dangerous even for a trained ninja, and a lot of the plant life is just as vicious as the animals." As he continued, Kamina's and Hiruzen's smiles widened. Naruto asked Kamina with a hint of anticipation, "Sounds like a perfect place to me, doesn't it, bro?" As he used his index finger to adjust the glasses on his face, Kamina said, "Sure, does it sound even better than that valley that we stayed in that had the active volcano?" The light in the room reflected off his glasses, causing his eyes to disappear, and his lips quickly formed a grin that could rival Naruto's, if not surpass it. As a lovely bead materialized above his head, Hiruzen questioned, "You two are serious about this, aren't you?" Naruto made an unquestionable point when he told Hiruzen, "No, it's a great location from the way you describe it, and no, a lot of people will even dare go in there, and outside the village walls are things that could make even the bravest man shit himself." Hiruzen handed over a small map of the village with their destination marked on it and said, defeatistically, "All right, but I will have someone who is constantly training in that area check up on you daily when she is not on assignment." Hiruzen was perplexed by Naruto's statement, which sounded almost random or as though he intended to live underground. "Fair enough, old man, and don't worry so much. I'm not the type to take on something I can't handle without reason. Besides, giant moles do not live in the land of fire. Too many volcanic vents." As they hurried out the door, Naruto and Kamina both had a "no promises" expression on their faces. "Okay, Naruto, just stay safe. You too, Kamina. Also try not to cause any trouble until tomorrow." Soon after, Kamina and Naruto returned to the streets. News of Naruto's return spread quickly in the brief time they had been in the village, because it was clear that he had received glares from practically everyone he encountered. However, Kamina placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder, indicating that he should not be bothered by them. As they followed the map the old man had given them, Naruto and Kamina paid no attention to the looks and murmurs going on around them. However, they were unaware that they would need to travel through the red light district, which is the worst area of Konoha, in order to reach their destination, and with both civilians and ninjas swarming the area. Today was the worst time of day to parade through this district. There were a minimum of 4 people in each booth. Gazing around him, Kamina remarked, "Well, this is awkward. This isn't the place I was expecting to pass through." Naruto adjusted his glasses so that his eyes were hidden from view and remarked, "Yeah, I don't like the feel of this place." As they moved through the district in the hopes of arriving at their destination, they maintained their composure. Unfortunately for them, a man a yard ahead of them stumbled out of a booth today, indicating that he was intoxicated. The man's eyes were glassy as he looked at Kamina and Naruto. He recognized Naruto, drunk or not. Additionally, alcohol causes stupidity, which the man in question was now carrying because the alcohol was preventing oxygen from reaching his brain. Then, with malevolent intent, the man came up to Naruto. Almost slurring his words, the man said, "Hey, you're the Uzumaki. You have a lot of nerve walking through the red light district. Something bad could happen." Being as courteous as he could, Naruto said, "Look, I don't want any trouble. I am just passing through." The man grabbed Naruto's shirt and pulled him to his face, saying, "Well, it's a little too late for that. You brought the trouble on yourself 10 years ago, and retribution is well past due. To piss off Kamina is something you really do not want to do, but tampering with those he cares about, such as his adopted brother Naruto, is the quickest way to accomplish that. While disparaging him and his family is one thing, you really don't want to try to intentionally harm his brother. Naruto would regret opening a door that this inebriated fool with his oily mitts on had done." After removing his face from Naruto, the man raised Naruto into the air. He withdrew his free arm to strike Naruto, but it was brief because Kamina hit the man's face with a right hook, forcing him to let go of Naruto. In a menacing tone, Kamina said, "The quickest way to get yourself killed is to fuck with my brother. I will not allow any harm to come to him, so leave now or suffer the consequences." However, the man proved that drinking makes you stupid. The man's comment, "Oh, so the demon spawn has a guardian now," pricked Kamina like a knife. This began to irritate Kamina. What'd he do? Brainwash you? Or are you just stupid? That made Kamina's blood boil because he no longer wanted to hear the man say, "He attacked this village 10 years ago, and if it were not for the Hokage we would be dead. Every breath he inhales is a disgrace to the Hokage's sacrifice. The demon needs to be killed before it tries to kill us again." Kamina then made an effort to relax so he wouldn't act hastily. However, he failed to notice that the man had picked himself up off the ground because his mind was preoccupied with competing ideas. Then the man charged for Kamina, drawing a kunai hidden in his belt. When Kamina suddenly jolted back to reality, she saw the man move forward to knock him down with his sword still in its sheath. Kamina thrust it into the man's stomach, leaving him stunned. Then Kamina grabbed Naruto off the ground, who was dazed from the accelerating situation, and ran away. Kamina halted the run after roughly 5 minutes and placed Naruto on the ground. While he began to catch his breath, he looked down at Naruto, who had a look of regret, guilt on his face. If Kamina disliked people feeling sorry for them because they were still alive, this infuriated him. "Naruto, what happened back there? Why didn't you defend yourself?" Naruto's nerves were shot when he said, "I don't know, my body froze and I couldn't do anything." This infuriated Kamina once more. "Naruto." When Kamina called his name, Naruto replied, "Yeah?" Kamina yelled, "Let's see you grit those teeth," as he struck Naruto with a strong right hook that struck his jaw and sent him to the ground. "Listen up, if you ever doubt yourself I will be there to belt you again. Don't feel sorry for me, it's my burden to carry, so don't worry about it. So don't believe what others say about you, even if it's one person like I have told you in the past. Believe in the Kamina that believes in you." Kamina replied while awaiting Naruto's response. Then Kamina grinned and Naruto said, "Sorry, I forgot about that." Kamina exclaimed, "Good," which left Naruto perplexed. "Huh? There will come a time when my faith in you might not be sufficient for you to get energy from people who believe in you, even if it's just me," Kamina uttered during his epiphany. "But what if I can't gain confidence in myself?" As Kamina ruffled Naruto's hair, causing him to playfully slap it away, he said, "If you don't have confidence in yourself, that could put the people you care about in danger, and when they lose their confidence it may even happen to me. So don't believe in the you who believes in me. Don't believe in the me that believes in you. Believe in the you that believes in yourself." As Naruto turned to face Kamina, they resumed following the map. Naruto said, laughing, "Hey bro, you know you kinda contradicted yourself there." Kamina joined him in a moment. Gazing into space, Kamina questioned, "By the way Naruto, why did you choose the Forest of Death for our new home?" As Kamina's smile widened, Naruto remarked, "I chose it because he said it was a secluded area and feared by both villagers and ninja alike, and I don't like passing up challenges." Soon after, they arrived at a gated, forest-like area with the name, Area 44, written in kanji above the entrance. Without wasting any time, they hurried into the forest with their towering trees. The area seemed to have existed since the beginning of time. As the sun started to set, the forest's lighting became extremely dim, and the fact that most of the light entering the forest was already blocked by the forest didn't help either. The forest itself had a foreboding aura that sent shivers down Kamina and Naruto's spines. Naruto was no better, and Kamina's smile widened even more. As a result, they received a positive score of 3 out of 5 on any meter that measured insanity. Things in the shadows appeared to creep along their path, and everything they passed appeared to be alive. In addition to her instinct to fight like the animals in the forest, Kamina had completely lost her sense of common sense. However, that was just Kamina being Kamina. Naruto needed to maintain composure. Within seconds, a monstrous centipede swooped down from the treetops and landed in front of Kamina and Naruto, screamed viciously, and lunged towards them. However, it never came into contact with them because Kamina and Naruto had jumped into the air and delivered a drill-like kunai by free falling, embedding his sword into the creature's head and killing it. As Naruto grinned, Kamina questioned, "Well, that was fun, but I can't fight things like this every waking moment, so what are you planning, Naruto?" "Simple, we are going to go underground." "Why are we doing that? I really hate ceilings, you know that." "It's not like we are going to be trapped underground forever bro, it will be our home. Besides, you don't have to stay down there when you're off duty," Naruto responded with a counterclaim. Even though Kamina was unable to refute Naruto's logic, he was not required to agree with it. Naruto thought that a hollow petrified tree would be the ideal spot to start digging after a short period of location scouting. As he shouted, Naruto let his backpack drop to the floor and took his core drill off his neck and put it into his chest's core drive. "It's login time." As Naruto's body started to change shapes once more, it started to envelop itself in a light cocoon. When the cocoon exploded, a head the size of a man with arms and legs was visible. However, it was much more than that. so it was a discretion that a simple-minded person could grant. From the lips to just below the eyes, the head-like entity's face maintained an almost human appearance despite being maroon in color. Encircled by a turquoise frame, the eyes were full of color, a golden yellow that seemed to glow as you looked at it. The nose was symmetrical in shape and lowered to the middle of the face. It was crimson red and extended to the sides of the head, where it met two onyx wheel-like structures from which the arms protruded. It continued to the top of the face, where it was possible to call it a forehead, and overlapped the face by no more than 3 inches. The arms stretched on the inner bicep, stopping just before the forearm, and were maroon at the joint. The outer bicep was covered by an onyx-colored arm guard that ended at the elbow. The crimson-red forearm, which was more of a bulk in the shape of a cylinder, extended down to the spot where the wrist should have been, where a maroon hand stuck out of the arm. The remainder of the body, which was crimson-red in color and had the typical head shape, jutted to the center of the back, where a silver cylinder-like structure led down just before the head's back end. The crimson-red armor encased the face. A canapé shaped like a brain covered the top of the head. Additionally, there was a circular-shaped device in the middle of the forehead that appeared to give the head's figure a distinctive motivation. As Naruto Logan rubbed his stomach, Kamina said, "Hey Naruto, how long do you think this will take you? Because I'm hungry." Naruto Logan responded, making a cross with both hands and yelling, "Not too long, an hour, maybe 2. I just have to summon the construction crew, and with me in Logan form it will fly by fast. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." 2 Naruto Logan clones appeared directly behind Naruto, and 20 identical clones of Naruto in human form also appeared. Naruto faced his own creation. The clones' Logan's human-like lips parted to reveal human-like teeth in a smile. Pleased with the outcome of his labor, however, Kamina was sitting against a tree, dozing off. Directly behind the clones, Naruto decided that this was the ideal moment to start working because he deserved to sleep. "Okay everyone, you know what you have to do. Make sure you stay in disguise. There are 4 separate scrolls in my bag. It will have the funds you need for supplies. Now go." Naruto yelled at the human clones. As Naruto turned to face the Logan clones, he thought to himself, they may not be able to use spiral power, but when the chips are down, they are a reliable asset to have. Naruto addressed the Logan clones when he said, "Okay, you 2 follow me down. In exactly 5 minutes I tell you what to do from there." Spiral power suddenly exploded out of Naruto's mouth and any other openings on his body where it could have escaped, revealing himself as Logan at the time. Unexpectedly, a cone-shaped drill that extended forward emerged from the device in the middle of Logan's forehead. 2 more cone-shaped drills, which were significantly bigger than the one on top of his head, suddenly began to fold inward as his hands began to fold inward. Logan and Naruto suddenly slammed all 3 drills into the ground, sinking quickly as they pierced the hard rock soil. After 5 minutes had passed, the 2 extra Logan clones followed their creator exactly as instructed and fell freely down the large hole that had been created. After 2 minutes of free falling, they hit the ground. Fortunately, a spring-like band that was released by their legs helped to cushion their fall. When they looked around, they discovered that they were in a sizable cavern that resembled a den and that Naruto Logan was standing at a wall, preparing for yet another digging session. Seeing his clones instantly, Naruto gave the order for one to begin digging in the opposite direction from him and the other to dig downward. After an hour, the den that the 3 Logans had been excavating was large enough to house half of the village. However, wood paneling and electrical outlets had been installed through the walls because of Naruto's clones. He shuddered at the thought of what had happened, and he had even added plumbing as a result of a very disgusting accident. However, he still needed to add a few more things before he was finished. Still in Logan form, Naruto moved to the middle of the confined space and started drilling a big trench-like hole in the ground once more. After concluding that was sufficient, he left the trench and pulled back his drills. Then, feeling worn out, Naruto returned to his human form and collapsed to the ground. It can be exhausting to use so much spiral power at once, but he felt he couldn't stop yet, so he grudgingly stood up and flashed a series of hand signals. In the cavern, Naruto yelled, "Ninpo! Kurodaya Batsu!" as a black diamond-like crystal burst from the ground at the bottom of the trench, covering the interior of the trench and bursting out of the walls to form a sink-like structure around and in several other rooms in addition to the room he was in. Naruto struggled to the main cavity of his newly constructed underground home, feeling exhausted but with one last task to complete before he was finished. Due to chakra depletion, he walked as best he could until he reached the center of the room, where he shouted and flashed through the same hand signals he had just used. "Ninpo! Kurodaya Batsu!" And once more, pillars of black diamond-like crystal rose from the floor, reaching from the room's corners to the top, creating the support beams. However, a second set of the crystal, roughly the size of a small tent, exploded from the ground directly beside him. When Naruto blacked out, that was all he could manage. Kamina was standing in front of Naruto when he woke up, looking at Naruto's weekend form with a worried expression on his face. With compassion, Kamina said, "Hey man, you look like hell, what happened to you?" Naruto grinned and remarked, "Just used too much chakra, but at least we have a home to like in now." As Kamina assisted Naruto to a freshly positioned beige sofa, she remarked, "Yeah, one of your clones woke me up and I gotta say this place looks pretty good, and even the furniture you collected from bandits looks good in this place. Yeah, well, at last one of us thinks ahead, unlike you bro. Hey, I'm not that bad, at least I was there to save your ass all those times or you wouldn't have any of this," Kamina responded in retaliation. Naruto laughed and remarked, "Yes, but you're not very smart when it comes to book smarts." In defeat, Kamina remarked, "You got me there, I would never be able to work with electrical wires like you can. Just thank Raiga-sensei for teaching me how to work with electrical equipment, it makes a great opening for infiltration." Naruto was slightly chuckling. Kamina, let's just say she didn't like being nearly eaten, treated Naruto to a delicious dinner of fresh snake meat later that evening. Naruto, however, had fallen asleep. Now that everything had subsided, Kamina covered Naruto with a blanket she took from a bed in one of the new nearby rooms. Before Kamina went to bed, he said, "Sleep tight little bro, you deserve it." For the first time in his life, Iruka felt the need to step down from his role as an academy instructor in the early hours of the morning in Konoha. Furthermore, class wouldn't begin for another 10 minutes, so that's not the funny part. But before he could come up with another idea, someone knocked on his door. Iruka called out, "Enter," as a second teacher came in. "Sorry, but the student that is joining your class today has just arrived." Letting out a sigh, Iruka made his way to his classroom to greet the new student. The problem was that he didn't even recognize himself, but he chose not to think about it as he entered the classroom. He could see the outline of the student behind the door, but he was unable to identify them, so he would simply ask them to introduce themselves. "Okay class, today we have a new student joining us, be sure to show them the respect they deserve. You can come in now," Iruka called out to the individual. When the door opened, the person he saw had turned pale and appeared to be staring at a ghost. The individual in question was reported to have passed away 3 years prior, and the class was at a loss for words. The person just grinned at this. "Hey everyone, I'm back, the one the only Naruto Uzumaki, just who the hell do you think I am?" Naruto had found the faces of everyone in the room to be absolutely precious. It was similar to witnessing one of his tricks play out on an unwary victim. He was able to identify a few of the other pupils who had previously attended his class. As he continued to sleep, Naruto noticed that Shikamaru Nara was still as lethargic as ever. Another person who had gained a little more weight was Choji Akamichi. Naruto couldn't help but laugh at Kiba Inuzuka and his dog Akamaru's shocked looks. Shino Aburame appeared completely unfazed by Naruto's return. However, before he left, Naruto's gaze fell on Sasuke Uchiha. His class rival. Naruto could tell by Sasuke's expression that he didn't give a damn about his identity, not to mention his groupies, Ino Yamanaka, who could perpetuate blonde stereotypes for decades to come, and Sakura Haruno, the pink-haired banshee, and his former crush. They had been vying for Sasuke's attention, so they hadn't even registered his gifts. Iruka rushed over to Naruto and pulled him into a death grip known as an embrace because he couldn't contain his tears. Breathing was extremely difficult for Naruto, but it was worthwhile because otherwise, he would not have noticed the person staring at him. In the rear classroom, he noticed a girl. Her face was covered in an unnatural shade of red, but he could tell it was blush. Naruto couldn't tell if she was blushing at him or someone else because her midnight blue hair obscured her eyes. She was cute. He had to admit to himself for a split second. He saw the pools of glittering lavender that were her eyes, and she was stunning. He wished he could have stared at her a little longer, but Iruka's bear hug was exhausting him. The other students laughed a little when Naruto screamed, Iruka-sensei, can't, breath," as Iruka released Naruto. Iruka said, nervously scratching his chin, "Sorry I got carried away, it's just very good to see you again." Naruto said, laughing a little, "I don't blame you as you aren't the first person to do that this week." Iruka made Naruto smile by saying, "Well, Naruto, since class is in session, how about you and I catch up after class? I'll treat you Ichirakus." Naruto declared, "I look forward to it, Iruka-sensei," as he completed his journey to the rear of the room via the rafters. The best way to learn more about the girl who was staring at him was to do some research. He sat down beside her, but a few seconds later he would realize that was a huge mistake on his part. The girl who had been ogling Naruto was Hinata. She was still completely smitten with the boy. She never would have imagined that he would be sitting next to her. She couldn't have been more shy sitting next to her crush, and her face was getting redder by the minute. However, it was also clear that blood was flowing to her head, causing her face to flush an unusually red. Naruto enjoyed passing the time because he never really enjoyed sitting in class and concentrating on the curriculum all day. He decided to start a conversation with the girl next to him in order to learn more about her. Naruto, who had forgotten her from his earlier academy days, said, "Hey, I'm Naruto. What's your name?" Hinata wasn't the most famous person in the world, so who could blame him? She stumbled shyly, "Hi, Hinata, hi, Hyuga." Naruto touched her forehead and said, "That's a beautiful name. Your face is red. Are you feeling all right?" Hinata fainted at his touch, unable to resist the urge any longer. In other words, Naruto wasn't the most intelligent person in the world to know what to do in this kind of situation because he wasn't used to seeing someone faint in an attempt to maintain his composure. He was now formally freaking out. However, at that moment, Naruto recognized a voice as Kiba's. Kiba's shout, "Crap! Iruka-sensei, Hinata has fainted again," immediately caught Iruka's attention. Iruka responded with a deep sigh, "Okay, lay her against the wall till she wakes up." Feeling accountable for the spell that caused Hinata to faint, Naruto assisted Kiba in carefully removing Hinata from her seat and placing her against the back wall of the classroom. It was impossible for Naruto to avoid feeling ashamed of the circumstance, but thinking about the past was pointless. What mattered was the present. Iruka's lecture had left Naruto once more in a state of solemn stupor. After some time had passed, Hinata came out of her daze and sat down quietly beside Naruto. One could practically cut the tension between the two with a knife. Touching Hinata's forehead made Naruto feel as though he had done something incorrectly because her brain was still processing the information from the previous incident. Hinata was confused. Kamina had also come to the Hokage Tower for his exam while Naruto was at the academy. The wind caused his cape-like cloak, which was hung around his shoulders by two golden tassels, to flutter behind him. If his enormous smile wasn't proof enough, he was ready for anything, and he adjusted his glasses accordingly. Hiruzen and Kamina were separated by a few feet. His helpers were only 3 steps behind him. A man on his left was dressed in Konoha's typical Jonin attire, which consists of a dark blue spandex shirt and an armored green vest with convenient pouches for concealed weapons or scrolls. His disheveled chocolate brown hair hung out from the sides of his bandana-style headband. He had a katana strapped to his back that he could draw at any time. However, Kamina's attention was drawn to this man because he appeared to be on the verge of passing away from a disease. His eyes appeared glazed over as if he were exhausted, and his skin was pale, almost ghostly white. Furthermore, his coughing sounded as though his lungs were collapsing in on themselves. Despite her sympathy for the man, Kamina remained vigilant because his appearance could be a disguise. The man on Hiruzen's right, who also wore Konoha's standard Jonin uniform, came next. His light brown hair fell over his face, and he also preferred the bandana style for his headband. Although he appeared to be a very carefree person, Kamina was fairly certain that chewing on a senbon needle posed a health risk. After taking a long drag from his pipe, Hiruzen said, "Good morning, Kamina. Did you have a pleasant evening?" With a smile that was getting bigger, Kamina said, "It was great, but from the way you asked it you were expecting us to do something stupid." In an attempt to shift the topic, Hiruzen said, "Shall we get started?" Kamina said, "Yeah, sure. What do I have to do?" "We shall evaluate your skills by you facing off against a 3-man team." Kamina said, "Counting 2 instead of 3, so I have to take on 3 bozos for as long as I can. Piece of cake, but you're missing someone." After a few seconds, Kamina's face was suddenly swept by a stream of kunai following the first brush. Kamina twisted his body to get a better look at where the knives were coming from. Kamina wasn't prepared for the woman who landed a few feet away. Her dark purple hair, which almost resembled the bristles of a pineapple, was pulled back in a ponytail. Her chocolate brown eyes were filled with a wide range of emotions that changed every second when she looked at you. Her smile was so sadistic that it could make any man wince. Curiously, though, Kamina also thought it was a little sexy. She was dressed in a knee-length beige trench coat. Under the coat, she wore a fishnet t-shirt, and her upper body would be fully visible to everyone if it weren't for the mesh armor underneath. The neon orange miniskirt she wore gave the impression that she was wearing stilettos. However, Kamina could see that her clothing allowed her to move freely, and if it weren't for the color, her stealth would have been nearly flawless at last. A necklace composed of a nylon rope-like string was dangling around her neck. A trinket with 3 spherical sections was fastened to the string, and a thorn that resembled a crescent moon protruded from the side on the lowest link. All in all, it looks like the tail of a scorpion. The woman was no older than 19. According to Kamina, she was also stunningly beautiful. However, he could tell she was insecure by the doubt in her eyes. Kamina ignored all of these ideas and returned his focus to the Hokage. The elderly Kage took a long drag from his pipe and said, "Well, Anko, you seem to be running a bit later than normal. I hope you aren't picking up any habits from Kakashi." While he knelt down for Hiruzen, she said, "Like I would mimic that lazy son of a bitch." But I do apologize for being tardy. This took a little longer than expected in the interrogation department. That is all right. The fact is you made it before anything serious has happened, and you were able to make one of your entertaining entrances. Hiruzen laughed as he replied. Kamina deliberately used the statement, I do have to admit you have a lot of spunk for a chick, to create a lighthearted tension in the small group. Kamina's goal was to incite some resentment so that when it came time to fight, her actions and line of thought would be impacted as she responded to his sexist remark regretfully. It was successful. She disappeared in an instant and then resurfaced kneeling in front of Kamina, holding a kunai perilously near his manhood. Her smile stretched steadily across her face like a snake slithering in the grass as she asked, You have a lot of guts to say that. I have to wonder, are you just blowing steam out of your ass, or do you actually have the balls to carry your words and brave the consequences? At least to the unaided eye, Kamina simply stood there without even flinching. His eyes were invisible because his glasses were reflecting the sun's light at an angle. His eyes were filled with sheer fear. He might have ruined any chance of asking her out, but not because of the kunai at his crock. Yes, well, just who the hell do you think I am? The mighty Kamina has faced many foes and has found never to underestimate his opponents, but fucking with their heads is just too much fun, Kamina replied with a grin. Then an unforeseen event occurred. Then she jumped up to eye level and started roaring with laughter. She put a hand on his left shoulder and wiped a tear from her face while he composed himself. I got to tell you, other than that, no one has ever made me laugh this hard before. I like you. You're a breath of fresh air compared to most of Konoha's dull serious get the job done decorum, she said as she laughed. Hiruzen gestured for Anko to join the other two jonin, saying, Okay, Anko, I think that is enough horseplay. We need to get back to business. Hiruzen then went over the guidelines, which were used to illustrate Kamina's evaluation. He was supposed to battle the jonin squad and survive as long as he could. It was forbidden to use lethal force. The goal was to disable your opponents in any way you could, excluding killing them. Now that you know the test, here are your opponents. To my left is Hayate Gecko, to my right is Genma Shiranai, and finally right in front of me is Anko Midarashi. Kamina Uzumaki said, Okay, ya bozos, I'm going to say this once, so clean the wax out of your ears. My name is Kamina Uzumaki, remember it, in a way that would have made a loudspeaker look inadequate. They looked at Kamina for a moment, trying to decide if he was crazy or simply unintelligent. Soon after, as both sides took their places on the training field, the thought vanished. Hiruzen yelled, Now that all introductions are over, let the exam begin, as the two groups dispersed. In keeping with his character, Kamina charged forward, pulling his Murasama from its sheath and aiming it at his adversaries. Being naturally hot-headed, Kamina assumed they would accept his approach as if he were a fool charging into a fire. Perhaps, in fact, that was precisely what he was doing. When Hayate saw Kamina's sword, he thought for a moment, this should be fun, fellow swordsman. One of Konoha's best swordsmen, Hayate launched himself into the air after drawing his sword and removing himself from the tree he had landed on. Hayate yelled, Mikazuki no Mai, as he began his attack, his movements producing a range of afterimages. When Hayate's blow struck Kamina's sword, he lifted it to his face. Kamina was pushed back slightly by the attack's inertia. At this point, Kamina pushed his blade forward, and because of its length, Hayate crashed into a tree a few yards away. A senbon needle started hurtling in Kamina's left direction. In less than a nanosecond, Kamina deflected the needle, and it touched his Murasama. Genma emerged from the dense wilderness to Kamina's left after her first reaction. Kaiten. Gokakyu no Jutsu. Genma screamed, releasing a huge ball of fire that sped toward Kamina. Through a set of seals, Kamina exclaimed, Oh, yeah, well, suck on this. Kamina shouted, Kei's no Yeba, as an unseen vortex engulfed his Murasama. Kamina swung his sword against the flaming ball of flame and rushed forward, gaining some momentum. The battle was at a standstill, but his sword was acting like a bat striking a baseball. Kamina knew that he would become extra crispy if he didn't do something right away because he couldn't hold the jutsu for very long. Kamina yelled, Futon. Renkuden. As he started to take a huge breath, all of the air in Kamina's lungs suddenly burst, creating a huge, spiraling vortex that resembled a cone. The enormous ball of flame was drilled against by the mass of air. In turn, it accomplished its goal by making the fireball bigger as the air fueled the flames and sending it hurtling back at its caster. Genma ducked for cover, avoiding the ball of fire with a triumphant smile. Kamina left his one blind spot uncovered. Kamina had been silently rushed from behind by Anko. Anko yelled, Senejashu, as a number of snakes sprang from the sleeve of his coat. The snakes sank their fangs into Kamina's skin before he could react. As he tore the snakes from his body, causing deeper wounds in his arm and shoulder, he started to feel lightheaded. You should concede, These snake's fangs are laced with a neural inhibitor. You will lose all control of your motor skills in about 5 minutes, Anko said while looking at Kamina. Just who the hell do you think I am? Kamina exclaimed, shoving himself to his feet. I'm Kamina, will never yield, I never give up, and I never turn my back on my opponent. Then, as he assumed the form of Gurren and yelled, Henge no Jutsu, Kamina formed a seal. Anko recoiled at Kamina's metamorphosis. She had never seen anything like this before. Listen up, this is my final assault. If you want to beat me now, you all better rush me at once, and you better have one hell of a fire technique or game over for you. After that, Kamina charged at Anko, then Kamina leapt over her and onto a tree limb, hoping into the air. He waited for his opponents to fall for his trick. Hayate, Genma, and Anko formed a circle without even realizing it was a setup, like a moth to the flame. They all shouted, Kaden, Ryuka no Jutsu, as Kamina was suspended in midair and struck by 3 enormous dragons of flame. As Gurren started to fall freely in the direction of his opponents, Kamina was grinning maniacally. Man's wrath blazing chariot kick. Instead of making direct contact, his attack sent Anko, Genma, and Hayate flying with a flaming shockwave. Most of the surrounding area had been completely destroyed by the shockwave, and the match had to end because of the possibility of fatalities. Hiruzen gave Kamina a startled look. In all his years, he had never witnessed anyone pull off such a foolish stunt and emerge with the desired outcome. He was a real fighting genius. Hiruzen grinned and declared, I declare the match over. Kamina Uzumaki is the victor, congratulations. With a broad smile on his face, Kamina had returned to his usual self. As his vision faded, Kamina exclaimed, I am Kamina. I'm a man of indomitable spirit. I would rather die than give up, but I also wouldn't risk the lives of the innocent. Hiruzen turned to face Hayate, Genma, and Anko. Aside from a few minor burns and bruises, they were unharmed. However, at that moment, only Anko was awake. Hiruzen chuckled a little and then looked back at Kamina. Kamina appeared unconscious after collapsing. Anko moved to join Kamina. Anko, is he going to be okay? Inquired the worried old cage. As she continued to prod Kamina with a stick, Anko responded, maybe, the venom's effects only last an hour, but I think he's dead. Behind Hiruzen's head, a tiny drop of perspiration formed. It was just going to be one of those days, and he knew it. Apart from making someone faint, Naruto's first day back at the academy was rather uneventful. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow. He hoped that something spectacular would add a lot of interest to the day. However, there was one thing that made Naruto happy when he left the academy. Sasuke Uchiha, his rival, or, as Naruto had put it, his unofficial brothers. Naruto turned to see Sasuke after Sasuke put his hand on his shoulder. Only Naruto could hear Sasuke say, Naruto, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're back, Dobi. Good to be back. Now don't be going soft on me now. I need a good scrap now and then, and you're the best candidate, Teme, replied Naruto. Sasuke remarked, wouldn't have it any other way, before he parted ways. In his case, Naruto booked like hell, but he just walked home in his makeshift living room. He threw his jacket over a chair. He had spent the entire day at the academy, but his training was far from over. To refine his chakra control, Naruto had to do control exercises all the time. To be honest, he was aware that his chakra control was lacking. He had little choice but to put in a lot of training and hope for the best. Although spiral power could be used in place of chakra, it had a way of making some techniques change into entirely different ones or blowing up in your face with 10 times the force of the original technique. It was a cautious use, not that it wasn't a bad idea. Naruto once learned from one of his many teachers that the hardest path to mastering chakra control is the one you start with first. Naruto almost never forgot a face, though he struggled a little with matching names to faces. In addition, this specific man had a somewhat sadistic training method and was a masochist. Naruto was standing on a huge, jagged steel pike that would have injured anyone who attempted to touch it. To keep his position, he had applied chakra to the tip of his index finger. He could fall to a terrible end due to certain factors, such as exhaustion or losing his balance even slightly. The chakra must always flow, and maintaining the unusual position requires total concentration because even the smallest distraction could cause the chakra flow to decrease. Additionally, if he made a mistake, he had a split second to stabilize himself again by increasing the flow of chakra to his finger. Regretfully, his sadomasochistic sensei was correct. He was able to concentrate all of his energy on one area of his body and sustain it for a considerable amount of time. Was remarkable for a person of his age. For what felt like hours, Naruto lingered there. In actuality, it had only lasted half an hour. Sweat from his propelled lower body was pouring into his eyes, making his arm feel a little tired. His chakra was also depleting in his left arm. He could feel the muscles tearing because he was right-handed. Naruto used his left arm to balance the strength in both arms. The damage would be repaired by his spiral energy, but it had always left him feeling weak afterward. Naruto was startled when Kamina entered through the ceiling entrance right away. Naruto used the tip of his finger to send as much chakra as he could. He flexed his left arm quickly, forcing himself upward and landing safely a few feet from the steel pike. Kamina's overly enthusiastic demeanor said, "Geez Naruto, you don't need to get all jumpy every time I drop in." "Damn it Kamina. I could have seriously hurt myself a moment ago, so the pun is unappreciated." Kamina gave Naruto a partial headbutt and said, "Come on, I just got home, and besides, at least it would be better than being paralyzed." Naruto inquired inquisitively, "So everything went well I suppose?" Kamina boasted, "You better believe it. Those bastards didn't even realize what hit them after I won." "I don't think you need to gloat about it bro." In response to Naruto's remark, Kamina deadpanned the fact that gloating always resulted in pain was the problem, not Naruto's correctness that was the case for Kamina. At least he was skilled enough to make up for Kamina's lack of intelligence. Naruto asked again inquisitively, "So, what rank did old man Hokage assign you anyway?" "Tokubetsu Jonin, and on top of that I start teaching alongside your teacher at the academy tomorrow, and you have to meet the Hokage at noon tomorrow." "What?" cried Naruto. Kamina pretended to be shocked because he wanted to make fun of his surrogate brother a bit more. Then, feigning that Naruto's scream was painful, he started cleaning his left ear. "Ya got to warn a guy before you blow out their eardrum." "Yeah, whatever bro, just don't do anything crazy," Naruto said, aware that Kamina always overreacts when he's having time to himself. Naruto thought he might regret asking, so he asked, "So what did the old man have you do for you to make Jonin?" "I had to take on a team that Gramps put together. I can't remember their name but there were 2 guys and a woman," replied Kamina. "Do you think any of them would want to join Team Diaguren?" After giving it some thought, Kamina's expression darkened. It appeared from his body language that a painful memory had come to the surface now. Naruto regretted asking. He had no intention of hurting him and Naruto would accept responsibility if that were the case. Kamina's voice sounded as though it was having trouble saying, "Yeah, there is one. The woman, she was full of energy and made me look like a fool. She reminded me a lot of Yoko." Naruto was deeply affected by that final statement alone. He never had the chance to tell her that Kamina had fallen in love with her. Naruto was still a child, so love was a difficult topic for him, but he didn't exhibit much of it during his brief life. Naruto, glancing at his feet, said, "Sorry bro, I shouldn't have asked." Kamina got up from where he was leaning against the wall and approached Naruto. Then he grinned broadly and gave Naruto a shoulder pat. His eyes were obscured by the glint of light from his glasses. Kamina was about to cry, but he refused to bring up his issues with Naruto. "Don't worry about it buddy, I'll be fine, just fine," Kamina told the truth. A tear trickled down Enko's cheek. She had been curious about this enigmatic Kamina Uzumaki. She now wished she had never followed him home more than anyone else. She understood that the heart never heals. Hanging there in her sorrowful stupor was all she could do. "All right, let's get some food in us then it's off to bed. We have a big day tomorrow," Kamina gushed. Naruto said, "Okay, I'll go cook, but don't complain about the taste. Got it bro," as he left the room. "All right, you can come out now," Kamina exclaimed. Enko landed in front of Kamina after falling from the ceiling. The fact that he was aware of her presence completely shocked her. She was unaware of whether he had been aware of her presence the entire time. "So how long he answered, "The moment you started following me." Enko questioned, "Why not say something about it sooner?" As he gave her a chilly stare that made her wince, Kamina said, "Naruto is my brother and I wanted to discern whether you were a threat or not." His eyes were blazing with determination and malice. Enko responded, almost offended, "Hey, I would never hurt him. I was on the original ambush squad assigned to guard him." After she responded, Kamina's stare lightened as though she was nearly satisfied with her remark. He was still unsure about whether or not he could trust her. He then made the decision to put her to the test and obtain some eagerly anticipated answers. Enko's eyes darkened as Kamina probed, "Yeah, great job you did back then. You guys didn't ever show up when he needed it the most." "I'm sorry, it's complicated. I'm listening," Kamina said with a slight smirk. Another tiny tear ran down her cheek as she said, "The civilian council and some of the shinobi council members voted that action to help Naruto Uzumaki were to be delayed 10 minutes before we could take action." Kamina now had some sympathy for her. However, he now knew more about the people he would target. They would cover the cost. Yes, they would pay a hefty price for having sex with Naruto. Her attention was drawn to Kamina's statement, "Thank you for protecting my bro in the past, and as a token of my gratitude I'll let you in on a little information. But you are never to repeat this. I trust you, but you may not trust me anymore." To avoid giving Kamina the impression that she was weak, Anko boasted, "Please, there isn't anything that you could possibly know that could shock me." When Kamina asked, Anko gave her a puzzled and doubtful look. "Really? Not even if the so-called calamity that hit this village 10 years ago was standing in front of you?" She laughed and held her ribcage in response. "So you're saying you're the Kyuubi no Yuko? That's rich, I believe that, along with flying boars and the tooth fairy," she said. Kamina said as gravely as he could, "Yeah, you think it's funny now, but the funny part is I didn't cause an attack." Anko turned to face him, her face displaying skepticism. Anko questioned, "You fucking serious, ain't you?" Kamina started his story by saying, "Of course, just who the hell do you think I am? Not a monster, that's for sure, more like a victim of ironic circumstances." Anko was unsure of how to react to the notion of human-operated giant machines. Furthermore, it was absolutely insane for a stranger to appear as a giant face. She would have sent this man to Inoichi Yamanaka for a psychological assessment if it hadn't been for earlier today. In addition, he was already insane. On the other hand, Anko did enjoy a man who was a little wild. However, that was also how she liked her women in terms of equality. Anko's reputation was nearly as bad as Naruto's. Her sensei was a genuinely wicked man who betrayed the village for an unachievable purpose. Anko started laughing at the whole thing and exclaimed, "So this is what you mean by a victim? Then we are basically total dumbasses then." "Lady, you have no idea." As she started to leave, Anko said, "Well, it's getting late, I have an early morning at the interrogation department, so I better get home." Kamina put his hand out to meet hers and said, "I understand, but I would like to see you again, Anko." She shook his hand and said, "Likewise, who knows, maybe you're the best thing to happen to this village in a long time." Naruto had been surreptitiously listening in on Kamina, and they were a strange visitor. The fact that she had arrived without invitation did annoy Naruto a little. She was one of the few people he owed his life to, but that was irrelevant. He had even made an effort to purchase presents for her, addressing them to Miss Viper, and they would be gone by morning. Kamina knew what he was doing, so Naruto ignored the entire situation. All he wanted to do was finish preparing their meal and go to bed. It was pretty quiet the following morning until he arrived at the academy courtyard. He had just reconnected with Hinata, who was surrounded by 3 ominous-looking boys who were a year or so older than her. Sasuke kicked the child in the center's back, but he was too slow to follow his instincts and rushed to her aid. The child fell to the ground, face down. The 2 kids in the middle attempted to strike back, but they were too slow to stop Sasuke's jagged elbows to their stomachs. The children were so out of breath that they collapsed to their knees, struggling to breathe. Frantically, Sasuke asked, "Are you all right, Hinata?" As sweetly as she could, she said, "Yes, thank you, Sasuke Oni-san." He said, "No problem, as long as you're okay, I'm happy," and turned to leave. He started to approach Naruto. After spotting him, an understatement would be to say that Naruto was impressed. Sasuke had never struck him as the chivalrous kind. However, he had made a special effort to keep Hinata safe. Sasuke said, grinning slightly, "Hey Dobi, you're here a bit early this morning." "The same could be said for you. By the way, got to hand it to you, Teme, I never would have thought you'd go out of your way to protect a girl," Naruto chided. "Hinata is like a younger sister to me, and she thinks of me as an older brother, but those stupid fangirls don't like that fact." Naruto knew right away Sasuke's noble nature was unexpected. "I respect that more than you know, so I'll let you in on a little information. You're going to want to sit in the very back of the classroom towards the edge of the room today." "Why is that, Dobi? You're not going to do something stupid, are you?" "Me? Hell no. It's my brother. He is now going to be our assistant instructor starting today, and he always makes a flashy entrance." Naruto was shivering. Sasuke could tell Naruto was serious by the way he shivered. They moved swiftly toward the academy's doors. Naruto quickly noticed that Sasuke had heeded his advice to sit in the back. Naruto took the seat next to Sasuke after he quickly took the one next to Hinata. Naruto said, "Good morning, Hinata." To her she stammered, Good morning Naruto-kun." Shortly afterward, a throng of girls rushed into the classroom. There were cries of Sasuke coming from the prepubescent crowd. Sasuke was shivering like a cat hovering over a tub of water. When Naruto turned to face him, Sasuke did not particularly enjoy the swarm that surrounded them, and Naruto could tell that he was uneasy. "Naruto, you dumbass, get out of that seat. Only one of us get to sit next to Sasuke," said Ino Yamanaka. When a nameless girl said, "Look at the blonde loser, he thinks he's cool in that outfit of his," Naruto repositioned his glasses. Naruto was immediately enraged. "Look, the Hyuga whore is sitting next to Sasuke," he exclaimed. Another girl pulled her arm back and clenched her fist, saying, "I thought we told you to stay away from Sasuke, you dumb bitch." Naruto could tell by the girl's body language that she intended to strike Hinata. Something flew past the girl's face, nearly grazing it, Before she could even push her strike forward, the girl turned to the wall next to her, looking mortified by what had just transpired. A kunai-sized drill was embedded in the wall, but the crowd was completely unaware that it was a drill. Naruto's hand was frozen in the throwing position when the group turned around. Naruto was not going to allow the dishonorable attack that threatened Hinata to occur while he was present because he did not like it. He was now the target of hateful eyes that foretold a terrible end at the glares. He couldn't help but smile grimly. "Naruto! How dare you!" yelled a different girl. "No, that's my line," Naruto uttered in a biting tone. "You can call me names, make me feel like dirt, and even slander my very name, but when you try to hurt someone who doesn't deserve it pisses me off." 2 rows down, Kiba Inuzuka said, "Yeah right Naruto, like anyone here would be scared of you. I do agree though that she shouldn't have tried to hit Hinata." "Thank you Kiba, but I don't know what's worse, being the dead last or a fangirl who doesn't take their training seriously," Naruto chided. "As far as I'm concerned, I'm on a higher food chain than you girls. And I have only been back home for a few days. You have no idea what I'm capable of." Sakura Haruno yelled, "Damn you Naruto," as she punched Naruto. When he caught the punch, Naruto's arm was outstretched as the blow struck. There were a number of repulsive pops and snaps despite the obvious pain on his face. Naruto smiled like a serial killer at a piece of candy. Just 5 seconds later, to say that Naruto had turned into a bit of a masochist while he was away from the village would be an understatement. Naruto exclaimed, "Wow, that was some punch Sakura," as his whole arm went limp. "You broke my radius, dislocated my humerus, and shattered my clavicle." Sakura now had a very apologetic expression for attempting to strike Naruto. She merely intended to make some people think twice about listening to what he said, but she had felt his arm pop, snap, and even return to a strange position. With a fist to his face, Ino yelled, "Stop trying to act smart, it makes you look like an idiot, and stop exaggerating Naruto, she didn't really do all that." The preteen with the bubblegum hair said, "He isn't exaggerating Ino, I felt his arm break." She concluded, "I'll go get the nurse. Naruto, I'm sorry." Naruto slung his coat over his arm and exclaimed, "No problem. Oh, and don't go get the nurse, this is nothing. If you had severed my arm that would have been a problem. It'll be good as new in an hour. My Kekkei Genkai makes me a fast healer among other things. I'm just glad you apologized. Nobody ever apologizes when they hit me." Her feelings worsened when Naruto said that. She pondered how frequently he must have been harmed for someone to be so accustomed to it. With a dejected expression on her face, she left and sat in a random chair. "Make him move already. The loser is just faking," yelled a random girl. "Okay. This is getting on my nerves. Sasuke, Hinata, please get your feet off the ground," Naruto said, gesturing with his left hand. Sasuke and Hinata wasted no time in rejecting the request. Furthermore, Sasuke would listen to anyone if the fangirls were eliminated. Hinata was only concerned about Naruto at the time, but she was unwilling to defy his request because he had asked her to do something. With a slam of his foot, Naruto exclaimed, "Ninpo! Denko Janetsu Kogeki Suru." The girls in the crowd appeared to either faint or let out a moan of pleasure before collapsing to their knees. Kiba and, surprisingly, Sasuke joined Naruto in laughing. The seemingly impossible task of getting the love-crazy girls to stop talking had been accomplished by Naruto. Just a few seconds later, Hinata was at Naruto's side. "What did you do just now?" Sasuke inquired in astonishment. "I sent a small surge of electricity through the ground that makes the pleasure sensory in their brains go nuts, Naruto." The poor girls worriedly asked, "Are you sure you're okay, Naruto-kun?" "I'm fine, but now that they're taken care of, can you help me straighten my arm? It really hurts?" asked Naruto. When Hinata heard Naruto ask for her assistance, her heart ached. Hinata saw the tattoos on Naruto's shoulders after removing his arm from his coat, but it was the metal hole that was sticking out of Naruto's chest that truly caught her eye. With the exception of the sizable gap around the shirt itself, it was now apparent that Naruto had taken off his coat. Without observing Hinata's anxious gaze, Sasuke questioned, "So Naruto, what's this Kekkei Genkai of yours?" Naruto started taking off his necklace and said, "I can give you a bit of a demonstration, but I can't tell you much right now." Hinata questioned frantically, "Naruto-kun, why is there a piece of metal in your chest? Are you hurt?" As he inserted his core drill into the metal socket, Naruto remarked, "No, but you're going to discover why it's there." Naruto stumbled, "Okay, and here comes the fun part," as he turned the drill. There was an almost imperceptible green glow emanating from his arm. After a few seconds, it subsided, and Naruto made a movement with his right arm. Sasuke, Kiba, Hinata, Sakura, and Shikamaru all made a number of startled faces, and Shikamaru gave them a slack look. It took him a few test punches before he finally relaxed. Iruka Amino entered the classroom less than 2 seconds later. Sasuke continued to ask questions, but they could wait until later because class was about to start. Iruka was stunned after just one glance at Naruto. For a boy of his age, the exhale muscle tone was impressive. The tattoos, however, were a mystery. Naruto was always an odd child, but this was the cherry on top. He could only speculate as to how Naruto came up with the tattoos because they were so unrealistic. Okay class, today we have a new instructor joining us, so please show him the utmost respect, Iruka said. The words, "Yes sensei," echoed throughout the space. No one came into the room. For a few moments they began to question when this new instructor would arrive, that is, until there was a loud explosion and a stream of flame that swept through the classroom. Ironically, though, it never made it to the rear of the room. "All right, let's start this party," the man exclaimed. "All right, my name is Kamina Uzumaki, doesn't forget it. I am your new assistant teacher now, so get used to it." With a slightly burned expression, Iruka said, "Thank you for the interesting entrance, Kamina-san. Today Kamina-san will be teaching the class for you to get used to his teaching methods. I detest formalities, so please stop being so formal when you say my name." Kamina scowled. "Okay everyone, to the courtyard. I will be teaching you outside today." Now that he had followed Naruto's suggestion to sit in the back of the room, Sasuke was happy. Many students had minor burns or singed hair from their new sensei's entrance. However, he was also drawn to Naruto's alleged brother. He was unquestionably unique for an adult. Kamina and the class met on the academy training field. For some reason, Kamina had forced them to huddle close together, but it was a good change for their education. Gazing at the preteens, Kamina had a sly smile on his face. Kamina said, observing the disinterested expressions on the students' faces, "Okay, listen and listen well. If you want to be a shinobi, you must be serious to the call and forget all your little fairy tales. Out there it's kill or be killed. I don't want to see any of you here die." The fangirls were hesitant to follow Sasuke because he was standing next to Naruto, while Hinata was blushing. For once, Sasuke was relieved to be free of that irritation. What could have caused Hinata to blush as she did now baffled Naruto. All they had been doing was thinking. As he changed into a scale plastic cow in a puff of smoke, Kamina remarked, "In the real world a ninja must always be on guard. Guess what, you all fail." Naruto yelled, "Shit! Sasuke, Hinata, run!" and started to run away from the cow, followed by Sasuke and Hinata with a chant of "Shit, shit, shit, shit." Naruto hid behind some trees. Before the so-called plastic cow exploded, Sasuke and Hinata had no idea what was happening. The explosion resembled a mass pressure of air rather than a normal one. It was similar to pushing air from a glass bottle into a body of water. The air would eventually be released when that bottle broke. All of the students who were near the suicidal plastic bovine were knocked flat by this. Naruto yelled, "Damn it bro. I told you that's prank material only." Kamina said, "Hey, in my defense it was a good lesson for those who stayed close to it." As she emerged from the tree line along the training ground of the academy, Kamina said, "You need to lighten up, dear brother," as the class gaped at him. Naruto muttered to himself, "Yeah, but this is going to cause problems for me now." Sasuke, Naruto, and a bewildered Hinata returned to class. The others were giving him a really frightful look after his brother's stunt. They appeared to want blood. Furthermore, he typically turned into a punching bag when they demanded blood. "Okay, I know you probably didn't enjoy my stunt, but you have to expect the unexpected in the shinobi world." Kamina yelled as loudly as he could. "So today we will work on your skills in a squad battle scenario. You have now till after lunch to form a 3-man team, so that gives you 3 hours, use your time wisely." Naruto was in a lot of trouble after Kamina proved away with trepidation. Naruto started to retreat as the other students, with the exception of a few cretins, focused on him. As he looked into their eyes, he could see the fire there. He turned and ran in the other direction as fast as his legs would allow. Yes, he could have waited for his brother's anger to fall on his head. Still, he felt that it was preferable to not have his face rearranged. He reached the end of the academy training ground while being pursued by the irate students. To his astonishment and the glory that was chakra, he also ran directly up the nearest tree. He ran up it as though it were a part of the ground, without bothering to climb it. The attention of a cretin with bubble pink hair was drawn to this. She turned to face Naruto, who had just accomplished an absolutely impossible feat. After witnessing Naruto elude the other students, she forced the emotions aside. She located him close to the academy's front benches. She was still depressed over what she had done earlier. The time had come for a sincere apology to the sun-kissed blonde. Naruto said, "Hey Naruto." As he turned to face Sakura Haruno, the class's smartest student, she took a seat beside him and said, "I'm really sorry about earlier. Can you ever forgive me for lashing out like that?" When Naruto said, "Don't worry about it, I forgive you. I break my arms all the time training." The gullible girl gave him a startled look. "My body can heal at an alarming rate as long as I have chakra, so don't worry about my health," he told the truth. "What you did earlier, you used chakra to climb that tree, didn't you?" Oh, you noticed that, huh? Sakura said. Yeah, it was really amazing, with all the sincerity she could muster. The hook sinker was, thanks, but I want to know something. Why is Sasuke more worth your attention than your own personal training? It had never occurred to her to consider it. She had been in love with Sasuke, and her lack of interest was hurting her training. It was also pleasant that Naruto wasn't pressuring her to go on a date. This would be a pleasant conversation, she thought. She looked at her feet and said, you're right, I do give him more attention than my own training, but I also want him to return my feelings. Her head fell even lower when Naruto said, I get what you want, but Sasuke isn't the kid of guy that's into the whole affections thing. But in my brother's words, actions speak louder than words, so if you want to turn his head, focus on your training and get stronger. Sakura gazed in wonder at the sun-kissed blonde. Although Sasuke never took notice of any of his admirers' displays of affection, his advice was sound. She had tried everything to attract the attention of her young crush, but to no avail. She had been nothing but rotten to Naruto, so it was amazing that he was being kind to her. In fact, she kind of missed his constant antics and wondered why he wasn't chasing everyone for attention. However, it was the first time she had looked closely at him since yesterday. He had an air of dominance that was beyond his years for an 11-year-old boy. His muscles were stylishly hugged by his black latex shirt. His face had a more masculine appearance because his cheeks had lost the majority of their baby fat in the past. His eyes resembled pools of water, but they glistened with life experience that only seasoned shinobi had. For some strange reason, the tattoos on his shoulders seemed to go well with his personality and looked good on him as well, and the birthmarks on his whiskers were almost invisible. Hey Naruto, are you and Sasuke friends by any chance? Asked Sakura. In response, Naruto said, not exactly, we have a bit of a bond though. We aren't really friends yet, but I bet we could be. If you get serious about your training, I'll put in a good word in for you to him. You would really do that? Of course I would. You're strong and you don't even realize it. If you worked hard, you could be a great kunoichi. Naruto replied with a smile. Sakura smiled at his praise. It was the first time she had ever received such positive reinforcement. Why not give it a shot if Naruto thought she could be strong? Her only issue, though, was that she was unsure of where to start. Naruto, this is kind of embarrassing to ask, but can you help me with my training? She said with hesitation. He laughs and scratches the back of his head. Sure, as long as you don't tell your mom. She has had it out for my head since we were younger. I'll help direct your training starting tomorrow if that's fine with you, he says. She exclaimed, thank you Naruto, and dashed back to the training area. The fact that she had approached him for forgiveness surprised Naruto a little. The act of kindness was unfamiliar to him, however. He always enjoyed the sensation of getting up and making his way back to the academy. When Naruto heard him say, hey Dobi, those techniques you used earlier, I want you to teach them to me, he froze. Naruto questioned, why should I teme? Sasuke, looking to his right, said anguishedly, I need to get stronger so that I can fulfill my ambitions and restore my clan to its former glory. Naruto closed his eyes and remarked, I know what happened a few weeks after I left Teme. Believe me when I say revenge isn't the answer you want. If it's power you want, forget it. Power is nothing. It will destroy you. But if it's strength you want, we'll talk. But it's all I have. It's the only thing that's kept me driving forward all this time. What would you know? Sasuke responded with frustration. Pain, sorrow, fear, repeating to yourself I'm going to be killed or I'm going to die now, began Naruto. I know better than you think what was going through your mind, and what happened that night wasn't what you think, Sasuke. Now, Sasuke was furious at the blonde's word choice. How would he know what had happened that night? Well, that was it. How did he know what had happened? Other than a massacre. The full details were never made public, however. Naruto seemed to know more than he was disclosing. Sasuke mockingly said, tell me Dobi, what really happened if you know so much? Naruto piqued Sasuke's interest by saying, I'll do better. You come with me in during lunch and you'll find out discreetly for yourself. With a defeated expression, Sasuke said, all right Dobi, what do I have to do? Easy. I want you to disguise yourself as this when lunchtime arrives. Naruto exclaimed, removing his core drill. Then Sasuke said, that's all? More or less, but you could do me a favor. Sasuke grinned and said, depends on what I would have to do. Sasuke was deadpan when Naruto said, try to give Sakura a bit more attention. She really admires you and it wouldn't make you look gay all the time. Great people believe that I'm gay. In a sulky mood, Sasuke thought to himself. However, he had a brilliant idea to assist Hinata as well. Sasuke turned to face the academy and said, it's a deal as long as you do the same for Hinata. She has confidence issues that I've tried to help her solve. Maybe you could help her where I couldn't. Naruto said, sure, I'd love to help, but happened to her? Sasuke's rage was evident as he said, Her father has been more violent towards her lately. He constantly belittles her and even strikes her if she gets a single stance wrong. He treats Hinata's younger sister like a prodigy, and constantly calls her a failure. I want to help her but I don't know what to do. Calmly, Naruto shouted, "You may not, but I know just what to do." Sasuke was a little taken aback when he saw Naruto. His expression stayed composed as he gazed across the courtyard at Hinata, who was playing with Akamaru. Kiba, Inuzuka's dog. Naruto was clenching his hands so tightly that he started to bleed, and Sasuke could see that they were shaking. Naruto would have hurried in a blind attempt to exact revenge on Hinata's father if Sasuke had informed him of this a few years prior. However, he maintained his composure, which was very beneficial to him. Sasuke questioned threateningly, "What did you have in mind?" Naruto made Sasuke laugh for the first time when he said, "I say we find out just how all-seeing these Hyugas are, minus Hinata of course." With a genuine smile, Sasuke answered, "I think this will be fun for once, Dobi. Maybe we can even get Kiba in on his one." After a while of pointless chit-chat, the students were startled when the lunch bell rang. Naruto nodded to Sasuke, who then assumed the appearance of Naruto's core drill in a puff of smoke after fastening it around his neck. Naruto started walking toward the academy's doors. Naruto found himself at the Hokage Tower shortly after an Anbu arrived to escort him, and only a few seconds later Naruto was led to the council room, which was occupied by Sakura's mother and all of the most prominent clan leaders in Konoha. A man with most of his body covered in bandages said, "Greetings, Naruto Uzumaki. We hear you have a most interesting ability that would aid our village." A man who resembled his classmate Choji said, "Yes, Naruto, we would like to know more about your abilities." A civilian council member exclaimed, "Why bother? This pathetic excuse of a child couldn't possibly aid us in any way." A wave of murderous intent shot out from the shinobi section of the council in response to the man's remark. At least Naruto was unable to identify the other half, with Hiruzen emitting the better half. "Whether I do or don't have a unique ability isn't something you can judge. I am Naruto Uzumaki. Just who the hell do you think I am?" Naruto yelled with frustration. "My cheeky, aren't we? I like the kid already," exclaimed a rough-cut man who looked exactly like Shikamaru, save for the scars on his face. "Yes, I have an ability I can pass to my children, but the rest are unique to me," said Naruto. "I'll tell you that I can pass the power of evolution or spiral power to my children, that's it." A civilian with no name yelled, "How dare you, little brat, you must show respect to this council." "Respect is earned and not given, but I got business of my own I'd like to discuss," Naruto said. "All right, Naruto, but you have to make us laugh after we hear you," said Hiruzen, catching Naruto in a catch-22. A man Naruto instantly identified as Hyuga said, "I am interested in what he wants as well. I wish for the immediate pardon of Itachi Uchiha." Another anonymous civilian yelled, "Under what grounds? He massacred his entire family." "Naruto, I know your heart is in the right place, but he is a fugitive," Hiruzen said. "Oh, so you're unaware that there was a cover-up over the ordered assignation of all Uchiha shinobi?" replied Naruto. The room fell silent, and Hiruzen began to curse his advanced age more than before. Even though he had suspicions, Itachi killed the entire clan, not just the shinobi members. Even though Sasuke was furious about this, he chose to continue the story after learning that there had been a cover-up. "I knew not of this, Naruto. Where did you acquire this information?" replied Hiruzen. "From the big bad weasel himself. He was ordered to kill the Uchiha shinobi to prevent a coup." The man wearing the bandage asked, "And pray tell, what did he do?" Naruto uttered the words, "He couldn't do it, so he asked his best friend who had taken cover as Shisui Uchiha to take over the job," as he opened his mouth to laughs and profanity. "I say the brat is lying. There is no one strong enough to kill an entire clan in a single night," said a civilian after saying, "This proves that he cannot be trusted and should be executed." The man was interrupted by a pink-haired woman punching him in the face. To his surprise, Sakura's mother was being so formal with him. "Naruto, my name is Kagura Haruno. I would like you to tell us who were involved in this cover-up," Naruto said. "Sure, but you aren't going to believe me when I tell you who committed the crime," calmly replied Naruto. "Please continue, Naruto," said the elderly Kage, who was now suffering from a severe headache. "We will get to that later." Eyes immediately turned to three elderly council members. "I know their name, but not their faces. If I remember correctly, it was a woman named Kaharu and two men by the names of Danzo and Homura." Since Homura and Kaharu had previously been his teammates, Hiruzen felt deceived they had apparently not, but he had stayed faithful to them. It was unthinkable for the village council to commit such treason and to conceal such an act. To put it mildly, they were fortunate that the directive was not followed. Hiruzen felt uneasy and said, "Naruto, Please tell us who was the man who Itachi confined in. When Naruto exclaimed, "A man named Madara Uchiha," everyone, including the 3 suspected elders, froze. Hiruzen asked directly, "Naruto, did Itachi know any of this?" No, he found out later that night after he witnessed his parents murdered that Madara had spilled the beans. Itachi has been searching for him ever since. In addition to providing Itachi with a strong alibi, Naruto had discovered a conspiracy within the council. Sasuke was saved from a terrible fate because Hiruzen could not understand why Itachi should not be pardoned. Itachi's clever plan was to save his brother's life and direct Sasuke's anger at him. Judging from what you have told us, Naruto, I would say Itachi is innocent of all crimes against him. Hiruzen said, "After our colleges have a little conversation with Ibiki, I'll see about getting his pardon passed with the daimyo." Okay. But I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to finish on my personal abilities today. Can we residual? Replied Naruto. Hiruzen said, "Yes, but I'd like to see you in my office now. This meeting is adjourned for now." It all made sense to him, and he nearly couldn't believe what he was hearing. Itachi was equally devastated by his parents' passing as he was. But he also felt that he was to blame. Itachi claimed to have killed everyone in order to guarantee that Sasuke would commit suicide, and Sasuke now understood why. Sasuke, however, was still perplexed as to why Itachi would attempt to assign all the blame to himself. Sasuke simply did not comprehend. Hiruzen hurried Naruto into his office right away. Hiruzen's job was more chaotic than ever after Danzo, Homura, and Kaharu were hurried to the interrogation department almost immediately. However, he had to give Naruto credit because he had exposed a cover-up on an illegal order placed by 2 people, proving a man innocent all by himself. Now more than ever, he questioned whether Naruto had planned this out or if he had just thrown himself into it without thinking and ended up getting the exact outcomes he desired. In actuality, Kamina was a better role model for the boy than he had initially thought. Hiruzen said, "Okay Sasuke, you may come out now," which caused Naruto to sneer. Naruto remarked, "Damn old man, you're always too perceptive," as Sasuke mocked him into being in front of him. Sasuke's face was sad as he asked, "Naruto, did my brother really do everything you said he did?" "Dude, you have no idea. When your name was brought up in a conversation, he would always boast about how proud of you he was. And on top of that, he was always saying he hoped to die by your hands." Naruto was patting Sasuke on the shoulder. Hiruzen said, "I'm sure Itachi loved you very much Sasuke. Danzo had enlisted your brother in Rude at a very young age." With a hint of self-confidence, "After our investigation is over, I'm sure you'll be able to hear it from him yourself." After hearing those words, Hiruzen noticed that the boy's eyes immediately brightened. The boy's confusion over the entire situation was evident, and learning more about his brother's nighttime perception only made him feel better. Naruto said, "Sasuke, you shouldn't think about it too much," which caused Sasuke to turn to face him. "Besides, you have a soul sibling that should have your full attention now. Naruto, you may be the most insane person I've ever met, but you always have the perfect thing to say to cheer people up." Sasuke pondered in his mind as though his resolve had been fully restored. He turned to face the Hokage. "Hokage-sama, can we discuss that section 14 I gave to you a while back?" asked Sasuke. "Yes, I believe I have found a loophole for our dear little Hinata." Hiruzen replied, "I have seen firsthand Hiashi's mistreatment of Hinata, and it says in Konoha's Clan Protection Acts that a clan head, as long as he is backed by 2 or more clans, may remove an heir to a clan under pretenses of abuse or other extreme circumstances." With a fox-like smile, Naruto turned to face Sasuke. Sasuke was also overjoyed because he could now assist the one person who had shown him compassion rather than sympathy, and Naruto had already promised to assist in any manner he could, so what could possibly go wrong at this point? Kiba was Naruto's only backup because he was no longer a member of a clan. Kiba wasn't the most intelligent person on the planet, and he wasn't exactly sure what tact meant. Naruto handed Hiruzen a brown, formal-looking scroll and said, "Hey old man, we went through this together last night. I think it will be better than me explaining the extent of my abilities. I knew that today may get a bit out of hand, so I wrote everything down in there." Hiruzen looked over the information with great interest and exclaimed, "Yes Naruto, I believe that was a very smart idea. Naruto, all of this is amazing. All of this is enough to fortify your Kekkei Genkei into the Clan Registry Act." Naruto proudly pointed to the emblem on his coat and exclaimed, "Just who the hell do you think I am? I'm Naruto Uzumaki, co-leader of Team Dai-Guren baby." Fearing more paperwork, Hiruzen said, "Naruto, there is one thing that concerns me. We can't name your clan based on your last name due to Kamina. So we would need a clan name based on what your abilities can produce." "Tengen Toppa it is," Naruto exclaimed, surveying the space. "Old man, this paperwork is really stacking up. Why not make a cage bunshin to help pick up the slack? Naruto was intrigued. At that moment, Hiruzen's face touched his desk's wood. The professor was a legendary figure on the battlefield, and he had been struggling with paperwork for years. However, he had never considered employing the cage bunshin technique as a productivity shortcut. In all of his years, Naruto has repeatedly improved Konoha's democracy today. If he wasn't careful, he could simply become a better cage than he was. Naruto, my boy, that's ingenuous, exclaimed Hiruzen as she embraced Naruto. I'll be able to lighten my workload tenfold now. Is there any way that I can thank you for your wonderful idea? Naruto casually said, how about a map of the Hyuga clan compound? Before he could finish his sentence, Hiruzen interrupted, why would you need a map? Naruto, you're not planning on doing anything crazy, are you? Naruto answered, depends on what your definition of crazy is. Then Sasuke sighed slightly and said, alright Dobi, I think he gets the picture. Naruto, I applaud your enthusiasm, but you must understand that there are just some things that require subtlety. Yeah, I get it, and I don't care. I'm still going to give the Hyugas a wake-up call that will give the entire village a good laugh for years to come. Hiruzen walked to a small filing cabinet across the room and said, I guess I can't stop you. But promise not to make a big scene. Being Hokage is stressful enough. After being given a small scroll, Naruto remarked, well, if I were to promise, I'd be lying, but I will keep it subtle, no explosives or laxatives. Why doesn't that improve my mood? Before glancing at the pile of papers on his desk, Hiruzen asked himself, you will now meet your maker, my old foe. Sasuke was still in a gloomy mood when Naruto and he swiftly left the Hokage tower. Sasuke must have been experiencing difficult emotions, but Naruto also understood that Sasuke should handle things on his own at this time. However, Naruto was also aware that a large steaming bowl of ramen was the best remedy for depression. Although it wasn't realistic, it did the trick and always made you feel better afterward. Naruto put his hand on Sasuke's shoulder and said, hey Sasuke Teme, since we missed out on lunch, I'll treat you to it. Sasuke grinned slightly and said, fine Dobi, as long as you're paying. Naruto was pleased that Sasuke was handling everything so well, but all he could do was smile at his antics. Sasuke was not far behind Naruto as he continued to walk toward Konoha's business district. He hadn't had a good bowl of ramen in a very long time, and Ichiraku's was the place to go. Tuchi and Ayame were like family to him, and he was certain that they felt the same way. He had missed them terribly. The two teenagers soon found themselves standing in front of the dilapidated ramen bar that blended in with the neighborhood. Hey old man, Ayame Ne-chan, I'm back, so how about a couple bowls of your famous ramen for me and my friend here? Naruto practically screamed. A young brunette girl named Ayame, who appeared to be no older than 19, glanced over the counter to see what was causing the commotion. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the person there. She hadn't seen the blonde in 3 years, and because of the countless rumors that he had passed away, she genuinely thought he was dead. She was Naruto's biggest fan and never detested him for what he held. She saw the boy for the first time when he was 4 years old and was pleading for food since he was Ichiraku's biggest client. She saw him virtually every day and he was almost like a little brother to her. Despite not being as outspoken as the majority of Naruto's supporters, Tuchi was one of them. He couldn't always try to assist the child because he had a business to run. Nevertheless, he helped the boy as much as he could after first meeting him, which made Naruto their biggest client. They would let him hide in the kitchen if a mob was pursuing him because he was a genuinely good man in need of assistance. However, the knowledge that the boy was still alive after going missing for so long eased his burdened heart. With a shout of, Naruto-kun, Ayame jumped over the counter and threw her arms around the young blonde. You're alive, he's alive. The brunette ramen stand girl was thrashing Naruto back and forth for the second time in less than a week. Naruto was slowly crushed, and he cursed his luck. He pondered whether anyone he thought of his friends would soon do this to him. He brushed the idea from his mind, blushing a little. Ayame Ne-chan, choking, not breathing. Naruto, pretending to be suffocated, exclaimed. She wiped away her tears and said, sorry, Naruto-kun, I thought you were really dead. People have said so many things that it's hard to believe anything anymore. Naruto proclaimed, you're forgiven. Now how about some ramen here, while raising his arm in the air. Sure thing, Naruto, Tuchi exclaimed, beaming broadly. I'll tell you Naruto, my business has been very slow since you disappeared, but it's good to have my #1 customer back. As she positioned herself behind the counter, Ayame asked, so what would you two like to order? I'll take 1 barbecue pork and 2 miso, Naruto replied. I guess I'll take the spicy chicken if that is okay, Sasuke answered. As she joyfully returned to the kitchen, Ayame exclaimed, I'll have your orders ready in a few moments. Naruto was rustling through his cloak when Sasuke turned to face him. He took out the same scroll that the Hokage had handed him after a short while. He then spread it out across the counter to display the Hyuga Manor's full layout, although not as large as the Uchiha estate. Sasuke thought the estate was still enormous. He turned back to face Naruto, who had assumed a contemplative stance. He never in a million years imagined that the Dobi would truly be planning ahead. Naruto traced the main household's areas with his finger and said, "Okay Sasuke, this place from the layout looks would be heavily here and here. And as far as I can see there is probably no way in on the surface." Sasuke knew what he was talking about, so he had to give it to Naruto. It caused him to question what on earth he had been up to during his absence. Additionally, how much stronger had Naruto become during his absence, and how much more needed to be measured. However, he also considered the cost of acquiring such power. Before Naruto opened his eyes, Sasuke was in the midst of a pivotal moment. He could have sworn he saw Itachi crying as he recalled the night of the Uchiha massacre. He wasn't sure whether to trust his brother's body language or his words. Whether semantics or not, he knew Hinata, who had grown to be like a sister to him, and he wasn't going to let Hiashi Hyuga ruin the sweet, gentle person that Hinata was. But up until this point, he hadn't considered one thing: she couldn't stay with him because it would make her an easy target for assassination attempts. Where would she be staying? She had no choice but to remain with Naruto, but he wasn't sure if he would be okay with it. Sasuke waited for his self-described surrogate brother to surprise him once more before asking, "Alright Dobi, you got me. How are we going to get into the place then?" "The best point of entry is right under their feet because the Hyugas have a 360-degree field of vision," Naruto said, drawing a smirk from Sasuke. "I get it, since they can see all around them, why would they look down?" replied Sasuke. The blonde's only response was an irate growl. "Bingo, my semi-emo friend." Ayame returned a moment later with the boy's commands. The brunette was a very attractive young woman in the first place. In fact, considering how old she looked, she was only 15. Although she had a lot of admirers, she still hadn't found the right man until Naruto appeared today. She was wondering if her luck had finally run out. Blonde's struggles had always caused things to shift, sometimes for the better, and she pondered whether her luck would follow suit. The suspicious waitress said, "Alright boys, here you go. Naruto, you're not up to anything, are you?" Naruto thrashed wildly in his seat and retorted, "Nope, not me. My hands are clean. Why are you looking at me like that? It was the pink elephant's idea. I tell you I'm innocent." Ayame couldn't contain her laughter. "He is exactly the same," I thought to myself. The brunette's father yelled, "Ayame, I need your help back here." She hurried to her father's aid and promised the boys she would return. Sasuke wasn't going to let this pass him by, so he saw it as an opportunity to inquire about Hinata's living situation. He reasoned that it was a means of fostering a closer bond between Naruto and Hinata, who stood to gain the most. "So Dobi, I want to ask you, what should we do about Hinata's living arrangements? I mean, we are bringing her with us, right?" The brooding Uchiha's smirk changes to a smile when Naruto responds, "You know, that's a good question. No offense, you live alone and I've got my bro, but your place would be too obvious for them should they come looking for her, so I guess she could live with me, but I'll have to stop at a hardware store on the way home." Uncertain whether to anticipate the worst, Sasuke asked, "Alright, so what the Grand Master plan tonight anyway?" "I'll have the details set in stone by tonight, but first, what's Hinata's favorite color?" "Lavender, I believe. Why?" "Oh, just wondering what color paint and bathroom tile to pick up," replied Naruto. What the hell was this blonde, psychotic idiot going to do with that? Sent Sasuke's mind into overdrive. He focused on eating since it was Naruto and there was no need to think about that topic any longer. He sampled the dubious noodle dish and was pleasantly surprised by its flavor. He now knew why the Dobi loved ramen. The waitress who had just returned to the counter caught Sasuke's attention. He had never met her before, but she seemed like a decent enough person overall. With sincere concern, Ayame questioned, "So I see you boys are enjoying your meal. So Naruto, what happened to you 3 years ago?" As his face darkened, Naruto concluded that he trusted Sasuke, Teuchi, and Ayame enough to share his story with them. Omitting a few details, both Sasuke and Ayame were now a little jealous of Naruto after learning that he had a bloodline and being astounded by the variety of places he had visited. However, Naruto could only smile naively. Soon after, Naruto and Sasuke finished their meals, and Naruto politely paid the bill before leaving the stand to go home. "So is there anything I can do to help your master plan?" asked Sasuke. "Well, you could see if you can get anyone else we know in on the plan. Kiba, I believe, would be of some help." As he said goodbye to Naruto, Sasuke remarked, "I will see what I can do, but Dobi, I pray you know what you are doing." Naruto hurried to the Forest of Death to arrange tonight's activities. When he got there, Kamina was searching through multiple bags of what appeared to be clothing. Naruto was perplexed by this, but he ignored the thought because he knew Kamina was always up to something. That is, until he witnessed Kamina wearing a formal kimono in his trademark hues. Additionally, the back's Dai Gurren insignia was a dead giveaway. Naruto said, "Hey bro, what are you doing? Oh, didn't hear you come in. I was invited to a formal dinner tonight by one of Konoha's most prestigious clans. Iruka helped me pick out a formal kimono. I just had them iron on the Dai Gurren logo on the back. It's totally awesome." Kamina responded with his trademark boisterous tone. "Okay, that's cool. What clan invited you?" As Naruto's eyes widened, Kamina concluded, "The name slipped my mind, but they had really white eyes. The one thing I didn't like was the stick stuck in the ass attitude they gave off though." Leaving Kamina in the dark as if he were deaf and stupid, Naruto exclaimed, "Bro, you were invited to the Hyuga compound? Wow. This day just keeps getting better, eh? Excuse the analogy. I mean no disrespect to any of the deaf population. I took sign language for 3 years." Whether Naruto realized it or not, he was growing into a man that anyone would be proud to follow, and Kamina looked at him with pride. Next to Simon, Kamina believed that Naruto was the only person he could envision leading the Dai Gurren team into the future. The possibilities were endless with Naruto. Kamina questioned, "Just what are you yammering on about, Naruto?" "Well, the head of the Hyuga clan has been treating his eldest daughter Hinata like crap, and Sasuke is going to get a few other guys together and we're going to get her out of there while playing the biggest prank in the world on them," Naruto said with a grin on his face. Naruto blushed at the part about the damsel, but he was only able to nod in response to Kamina's query. "Oh, I get it. You're rescuing a damsel in distress. Wait, isn't Hinata the shy girl in the back of the classroom?" "Yeah, so are you in or what? It would be nice to have a guy on the inside." "You can count on me. I'll make sure that they are too distracted to even notice you. By the way, just what are your clones doing in that closed-off room? It's kinda driving me crazy." "Well, that's the thing. Hinata is kinda going to be living with us from now on, so, surprise." Kamina slapped Naruto on the back and laughed, saying, "Hey, it's cool, blood brother. At least I know there'll be someone to keep you in line." The only thing Naruto could do was blush at Kamina's antics. He understood what Kamina was implying, even though he was still too young to fully comprehend what a relationship was. As Naruto started chasing him and hurling kunai at him wildly, Kamina could only laugh harder. Naruto threw Kamina to the ground and then went to his room. As he sat thinking about it, he realized that today was already hell. He had restored trust in a friend's younger brother after uncovering a conspiracy in the Konoha Council and clearing the record of a reputed criminal. He had a difficult day, but it was far from over. As he closed his eyes, he hoped that nothing more would go wrong today. Naruto looked up from his pillow, and his eyes popped open. He had fallen asleep by accident and was unaware of how long it had been since he had slept. He had been out for almost 5 hours when his gaze drifted to the clock, which showed 10 minutes after 6. However, there was no time to panic. He needed to devise a plan quickly. He realized then that the Hyuga, or at least those with a stick stuck up their asses, were all about appearances. They wore their clothes to demonstrate their superiority, while the branch members, whether or not they were shinobi, were depicted as slaves. The main branch wore glitzy clothing. Naruto was furious at the thought, but he decided to put it out of his mind for the time being in order to protect Hinata before hurrying out of his makeshift house. He started packing a bag with storage scroll. He had to arrive at the marketplace quickly or risk running out of the supplies he required. He was going to leave the Hyuga with a lasting memory of this. He found his way to the Konoha market strip after descending from Area 44. The hardware store was still open, which was a relief to him. Immediately he picked up a carton of drain and toilet cleaner and several packages of dissolvable lime green dye. He then picked up Fixer, a chemical used to develop film negatives, to wrap everything up, followed by super strong super glue and super clear plastic wrap. He could use this to make life a living hell for the Hyuga. Save for the branch members, of course, but bubblegum pink hair dye was the one thing he needed to finish the whole thing off. Even though it might not seem like much, he could literally wreak havoc on the Hyuga community with these items. It was only a question of time until the Hyuga received their just desserts. When Naruto ran to the meeting place Sasuke had chosen, he unexpectedly saw 2 more people. He was glad to see Shikamaru Nara and Choji Akamichi beside Sasuke and Kiba, but he couldn't understand how Sasuke had gotten them involved. Even though Naruto was not very good at expressing his gratitude, he was incredibly appreciative of them. "Dobi, you're late," yelled Sasuke impatiently. Naruto retorted loudly, "Yeah, I know, I fell asleep and lost track of time, but I have good news." After receiving a "yeah" bark from his puppy Akamaru, Kiba said, "Okay, I'm interested. What good news could you have possibly brought with you?" While the rest of the group gaped, Naruto responded, "Oh, other than the fact my bro is going to be providing a distraction while we infiltrate the compound." Shikamaru replied, "That's a big help, but it won't make getting in the place any easier." Naruto exclaimed, "Well, getting us in is my job. as he spread the Hyuga compound map on the ground in front of them after taking it from his cloak. Okay, here's how we're gonna do this. Kiba, you're going to go in the laundry room and pour a few drops of toilet cleaner and drain cleaner into the Hyuga detergent. Can you handle that? Naruto responded. Kiba said, yeah, I can, but what will that do? Please don't try this. I know this from a horrible accident in my laundry room. A shelf broke and these 3 chemicals spilled all over the floor. I couldn't clean it faster before it exploded. Naruto said, simple, it will cause all fabrics it touches to turn a light brown, but I warn you, don't use more than a few drops. Okay. Anything else? Naruto concluded by turning to face Sasuke. If you see any laundry that is done, throw it in the washer and add the mixture to any running machines. Curiosity prompted Sasuke to ask, okay Dobi, what is my task? Naruto turned to face Shikamaru and Choji and said, you're going to Hinata's room and you're going to pack all her belongings in these storage scrolls. To activate them, open them up over or under any object and add chakra to it. That's all you have to do. Before we get too far ahead, I want to know what your reasons for joining us are. Naruto didn't have any suspicions about them, but he didn't want anything to get in the way of the rescue effort because Shikamaru and Choji never treated him the same way the other kids did. He liked them and thought of them as friends despite his laziness. Shikamaru never took someone's appearance or habits into consideration as long as you didn't call him fat or take his chips without asking. Choji was a kind person all around. In contrast to his typically slack attitude, Shikamaru responded wholeheartedly, saying, I heard what Hinata's dad is doing to her and I can't just lay down and let a girl like her be abused like that. It may be troublesome, but I want to help in any way I can. I like Hinata. She's too nice to suffer like that and she helps me catch butterflies for my family's greenhouse and my collection. I'd try to help even if I wasn't asked because I consider her a friend. Choji replied with a serious face. Good, I'm glad you're in. You two will work together going to all the bathrooms in the house. What you guys have to do is place one of these discs inside each shower head. Put a small amount of this hair dye in their shampoo. And lastly, you need to take this plastic wrap and glue it on the inside of the bowl so it's blocked. Can you do this? Naruto asked as he placed the items in front of them. Shikamaru questioned, you can rely on us, but what are you going to do? Once we're inside, I'll get Hinata out of there if you're done questioning me. How about we start this party? Naruto said, clutching his core drill. In order to inflict some much-needed discipline on the inflated egos of the so-called all-seeing clan, the newly formed team headed for the Hyuga compound. Silently, in the shadows, Naruto guided them to the rear of the Hyuga compound wall. Since Naruto didn't want to reveal his powers just yet, he was temporarily rigged. However, he had to make a drill in order to get himself and the others inside without being noticed. Naruto took his core drill off his neck and looked around at the other members of the group. With the rest of the gang complying, Naruto said, okay guys, I'm sorry to be secretive at a time like this, but I need you guys to turn away for a second. After inserting his core drill into his chest, Naruto turned powerfully, causing his right arm to explode with spiral power, and a big cone-shaped drill that appeared to be constructed of some of the best metal money could buy took the place of his right hand with a maximum length of 2 feet and 4 inches and a maximum width of 1 foot and 8 inches. The drill's dimensions were simply astounding for a device of this kind that shouldn't have existed. The brief energy release left Sasuke, Kiba, Shikamaru, and Choji frozen solid. Although they had not yet been trained to sense chakra, they had never experienced anything like it. This, however, did not feel at all like chakra. It was too primal and ferocious, yet simultaneously serene and calming still. The hairs on the backs of their necks continued to stand on end. Additionally, Kiba had to contend with Akamaru's claws piercing his skull. Naruto prompted his teammates to examine him and his new limb by asking, okay guys, are you ready to go? Yeah. They all said at once. The others were captivated by the instrument that propelled itself out of Naruto's grasp. Even though they had never seen anything like it, they were not shocked by the owner. It seemed normal to Naruto to use something that no one would have considered a weapon because it was so typical of him. As they got ready for the next phase of the plan, they allowed their thoughts to die. However, they did not anticipate Naruto pushing his drill into the ground or having an appendage from his hand begin to spin. In the meantime, within the main house compound of the Hyuga clan, Kamina had just arrived, and she appeared disinterested in the banquet because the people who had invited them didn't seem particularly interesting. He wanted some excitement, but these snobby stuck-ups made it a complete snore fest. However, he was certain that he did not like Hiyashi Hyuga at all. Even though his face alone made him feel angry, he decided to ignore it rather than annoy the man. However, up until now, it has only consisted of a group of wealthy snobs boasting about their wealth and how they have used it to harass those who are less fortunate than themselves. Something else, though, was making his blood boil. Women in questionably dressed clothing, whose eyes betrayed their true selves, clung to the conspicuously wealthy men. Once, he had witnessed the same desperate expression in Naruto's eyes, one that cried out, "Just get through this, and everything will be fine." Whether it was a man or a woman, Kamina was a man who valued honor. He detested those who exploited others for their own amusement, particularly when it came to using women as sex objects. "So Kamina, I hear you're from the newly founded Uzumaki clan along with the demo, little blonde whelp. So please tell us about yourself," asked a Hyuga who appeared elderly. Hiyashi made Kamina feel sick by responding, "Yes, I must second that request. We would all like to learn from the head of the newest clan in Konoha, as it would only strengthen our relationship between our clans. Daughter, make yourself useful and pour our honored guest some sake." A young, attractive blonde said, "Yes, Mizu no Kuni would also like to know of Konoha's new rising clan." Kamina saw the young girl Naruto had mentioned at that point. Before he and Naruto left the village, he recalled her face. She was a sweet, naive young girl who hardly ever spoke, and when she did, it was a violent stutter that was simultaneously compassionate and kind. When Kamina saw how the girl's father was treating her, the blood inside his body started to boil. However, at that moment, Kamina realized he could accomplish two goals at once by making a commotion and making this young girl smile. Kamina felt smug as he said, "No, I would not like any sake, but I would like it if this precious young flower would grace me by sitting next to me as I tell my tale." That is, if her father has no objections? Hiyashi was attempting to instill fear in the girl, and Kamina could see it. "Well, I don't see why not, but as long as she doesn't do anything to disgrace our guests, it is more than fine." He looked at this man and became even more enraged. Hiyashi was more enraged by Father Margin's unsightly mug than he was. Even in his dimension, Kamina would simply have to endure the pain while providing Naruto with enough distraction, and hopefully she wouldn't do this kind of thing ever again. Just a few seconds later, Hinata sat down beside Kamina, and he had to admit that her outfit was too adorable for words. Her formal pink kimono, which was dawn, featured multiple images of flowers that complemented the color. A lavender beret had been used to pull her hair up in the front right corner. She looked so cute that he could give her a big hug. However, Kamina allowed the urge to die because he wanted to maintain his macho image. Putting on his trademark glasses, Kamina stood up on one knee and said, "All right, you want to know about me? Well, here's the deal. I am not the head of the Uzumaki clan. That would be my little brother Naruto, and second of all, you are looking at the one and only Kamina Uzumaki, leader of Team Dai-Guren baby." Another elder Hyuga asked, "How are you on the council if you're not the head of your clan?" "I have a large number of powerful allies across the great shinobi nation that has earned the right to be in Team Dai-Guren. With their influence and strength, it makes my team a force to reckon with," Kamina yelled with his trademark optimism. To his surprise, he also got a laugh from Hinata, who was trying to cover up a slight flush on her face with her kimono sleeve. The urge to continue was strong, but Kamina had to keep it to a low roar in order to create tension in the world room. A man in a royal outfit said, "Oh, may I ask who all in this Team Dai-Guren has so much influence?" However, Kamina could tell he was troubled just by looking at him. Kamina's shocking response to the clansmen of so-called prestige was, "How about the cages of both Kusagakure no Sato and Kangakure no Sato? On top of that, the daimyo of Tetsu no Kuni. How in the world did you make friends with those tyrants? They are known as the most brutal madmen in the elemental nations," asked Hiyashi. With savage nods from everyone in the room, he said, "Well, when you help end a civil war and rescue the daughter of a cage, it can't hurt your chances with getting on their good side. The stories are pretty boring unless you'd like to hear them. That is, okay then, but I'm going to be vague on certain things, so don't call me stingy." Meanwhile, with the rescue prank crew, they had been amazed with Naruto's ability to dig so rapidly, as in a matter of 10 minutes they had made it clear over to the garden in the back of the main branch household. Sasuke had given each member of the crew a small two-way headset. Naruto wanted to ask Sasuke where he had gotten them, but he chose not to. With a silent gesture, they all separated to complete their individual tasks. Naruto was having the most trouble though as precious time passed. No matter where he looked, he could not find Hinata. It had gotten to the point where an entire hour had passed, and the odds of getting caught skyrocketed. That was until he caught Kamina's booming voice echoing from down the hall. He had looked through a crack in the door to see Kamina telling one of their past battles in a story format. That is when he spotted Hinata, who had been sitting next to Kamina. He could not help the blush that emerged on his face. She had looked beautiful in the kimono she was wearing, he had thought to himself. But he then spotted the Hyuga bodyguards surrounding the room. Naruto wanted to laugh, as they had all gotten so into Kamina's story that they were not doing a very good job at their assigned tasks. Naruto decided he would radio in to his team as to see what the current status of their operation was. "This is Crimson Face calling Shadow and Bruiser. How are things on your end?" "Just fine. One more to go, then we're done," replied Shikamaru. "How are things on your end, Raven?" Just finished up waiting for your orders, replied Sasuke. Kiba already finished, so go meet him at the checkpoint outside the compound. Hinata is in no position to be retrieved yet, Naruto stated, gritting his teeth. He was frustrated as hell as he tried to contemplate on what to do next. Kamina had fulfilled his promos tenfold, but that wasn't going to get Hinata out of the Hyuga compound without being seen. Kamina had dramatically finished the story of how they ended the civil war in Kusa. Ironically, all they really did was release the leader of the village from a genjutsu that the Kage's brother had placed upon him so he could get revenge on the other clans in Kusa. Naruto was now staring at a man who had his eyes fixed on Hinata with morbid intent. Something about this man screamed trouble, and Naruto didn't much trust the man farther than he could throw him, which, if Naruto had assumed Gurren Lagann, was quite a distance, even though the idea was amusing. The man who was wearing the robes that daimyos typically wore stood up, but he didn't look like any daimyo he had ever seen. Naruto stopped breathing in anticipation of what he thought the man might say because he thought he was about to speak. The man made Kamina and Naruto want to throw up when he said, "Hiyashi, it's been a lovely evening, but I'm afraid I am very tired and I must return home in the morning, so I must thank you for your hospitality and retire for the evening." Hiyashi stood and matched his bow, saying, "Very well, I thank you for gracing us with your presence from Kumo no Kuni Daimyo Dono." Then he looked over at Hinata. "Daughter, please show our honored guest to his sleeping quarters, and don't screw around or you will be punished." When Naruto looked at Hinata's face, he could see that she was terrified. Naruto glanced at Kamina and noticed that the same rage he had been experiencing at the time was still visible on his face. Although Naruto was aware that he needed to maintain his composure, some emotions simply would not go away. Regardless of the circumstances, Naruto was certain that he would protect Hinata from this unfair family. Then, in order to remain hidden, Naruto transformed into a tiny wild fox. Kamina saw the poor Hinata usher the so-called daimyo out of the room. Less than 2 seconds later, he turned to Hiyashi, who treated his daughter like a slave, and felt rage running through his veins. Men who treated others like slaves or as mere commodities for profit were despised by Kamina. With a slight smirk, Hiyashi Hyuga gazed back at Kamina. Looking directly into Hiyashi's eyes, Kamina remarked, "Your methods of raising your daughter are cruel. It may not be my place to say, but you shouldn't treat her like trash." "You're right, it isn't your place, but that girl has caused me nothing but grief since she was born, so as far as I see it, being cruel will only serve to make her stronger." "That's a load of bullshit. If you want her to urge to be stronger, she may get stronger if you encourage her, but the way you're handling it is destroying what little confidence the child may have," Kamina screamed as he got up. Hiyashi shot back, "And that's why she will always be weak and useless as a Hyuga." Kamina stormed out of the room after saying, "Okay, I'll leave you to your illusions of life and take my leave, but don't expect me to support your lifestyle." Naruto trailed Hinata and the dubious daimyo to a different building. Naruto didn't want to let her go because he thought something significant was going to happen. 2 guards materialized behind Hinata and the daimyo as they arrived at a random door within the compound. However, they belonged to the Kumo Nin and not the Hyuga. As Naruto turned to face them, a shiver ran down his spine. The only question was what they were up to, but he wasn't ready for this at all. The masked ninja said, "Okay boss, the sleeping powder should take effect in about an hour, so that is the most opportune time to leave." The daimyo slammed Hinata against the wall before she could finish her sentence. "Sleeping powder, what is happy?" The daimyo said, "We will be treated as royalty by the council in Kumo. An hour is all we need on top of finally getting our hands on a Hyuga female that does not have that accursed seal." Hinata trembled in alarm. "But first I'm going to have a little fun with this lovely specimen before we hand her over." A voice said, "Who the hell do you think I am?" Kick. As the dishonest daimyo's men were hurled into the air. "Hands off Sasuke's beloved little sister." Punch. The daimyo was sent out into the courtyard after being struck in the jaw with extraordinary force before he could react. Naruto was standing there in front of Hinata, enraged and prepared to spill the daimyo's blood by beating this freak into the ground. He would nearly make up for the fact that he was almost too late to help Hinata, which he detested. Hinata was forced to stay behind for safety. As Naruto hurried to the courtyard, he discovered something unexpected. When he arrived, the man had shed his robes, exposing his shinobi clothing, and was still standing. "You got guts, brat. In fact, I haven't been hit like that in years, but I can't have you ruining my plans, so prepare to die at the hands of Benki the Swift," the man screamed as he moved forward. The first attack was successfully dogged by Naruto, but the second one was not. Naruto dislocated his left shoulder with a quick jab a few feet away. Naruto leapt and clutched his shoulder in agony and desperation. He grabbed his core drill and attempted to insert it into the chest drive. "Before I kill you, kid, I want to know what your name is. You obviously know and care about the Hyuga girl, so I won't let your death be in vain?" asked Benki. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm not going to die today. I also won't let you take Hinata," Naruto exclaimed. frantically trying to insert the core drill into his chest. Very well, Naruto, it's time for you to die. Naruto became frantic as he saw the man hurrying through some hand signals. Even though it was difficult to bend your right arm to meet your scapula, this was murder on his arm. With a loud cry of Yanshin Shunshin, Benki was now viciously pounding Naruto back against the main wall of the Hyuga compound at too fast a speed for the human eye to see. Much to Hinata's horror, Naruto was hit with such force that smoke surrounded him. After a few merciless moments, Benki materialized directly in front of the cloud of dust. Hinata could only yell, "Naruto!" Although she had defied Naruto's orders to hide in order to check on him, she was shocked by what she saw. It was her fault for not being able to defend herself, and Naruto might have been dead. Benki may have been a sleaze, but he respected men who risked their lives for people they cared about. The kid fought bravely. Don't disgrace his honor by trying something brave. After all, you are my assignment. Come quietly and no harm will come to you. It's the least I can do for having to end his life. Naruto's voice rang out. Just who the hell do you think I am? You haven't killed me yet, and this fight is far from over. As the smoke cleared from the wall and a big face emerged. Then Benki took another sucker punch to the face. So the kid's still alive, huh? Well, I guess it's time to end this, he exclaimed. So what took you so long, bro? It was Kamina, the familiar sight known as Gurren, who said, the traffic was horrible and I have no sense of direction, you know that. Yeah, you almost made it too late. Oh, shut up and let's combine already. This guy really gives me the creeps. In Logan form, Naruto leapt into the air after pushing himself off the wall. His arms and legs folded backwards, and his body shrank, and a big drill sprang up from the bottom, spinning furiously. When a man's friends are threatened, he rises to their defense. He takes their courage and turns it into his strength. His fist becomes the unmovable wall that protects everything he loves. Logan collided with Gurren's body's dome. As Gurren's body started to break and transform into something new, Logan's eye glowed intensely. Along with his legs, Gurren's arms were longer. Logan became the head, and Gurren's face replaced the body's torso. The portion of Gurren's arms that bore the Team Dai Gurren emblem extended outward, forming armor-like shoulders. The gold-like battle skirt that samurai shoguns typically wore now covered the waist. As a result, the legs that had been extended appeared longer in the end. A helmet appeared from behind and fastened itself to Logan, causing both Gurren's eyes, which were hidden behind sunglasses, and Logan's eyes to glow brightly. Both Kamina and Naruto exclaimed, brotherly, combining Gurren Logan, as flames appeared to burst all around them.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.